Cleaning master.
The cleaner came home.
I was 12 years old when I remembered who I had been before. The Divine Oracle ceremony was supposed to be the most important morning of my life. Every child knelt at the same altar at 12, and the gods named what we were going to be. The priests called it a blessing. The court called it destiny. My father called it a measurement. I knelt with my hands folded. The light painted me in stripes, gold across one cheek, red across the other. The voice that came down was not a sound. It was a knowing, and the knowing brought back something I had never asked for. I remembered a cluttered shop that smelled of solvent and warm steam, a press that hissed when it closed, a bell on the door I could hear if I closed my eyes. I remembered the truck through the window. I remembered the road outside not being a road for very long. I remembered a life I had finished and not chosen to leave. I had been a man who cleaned things in a country no one in this hall would ever set foot in. The gods had given me back a fragment of him along with my new name. The priest read out my occupation in the careful voice he reserved for results he had not expected. Cleaning master. The hall went quiet for the length of one breath. Then, somewhere behind a column, somebody laughed. I did not move. My father, on his throne above the altar, did not move either. He was deciding something. I would not know what for 3 more years. A boy with my blood and my surname was not supposed to be a cleaning master. Cleaning was something maids did for coin. The skill came with no rank in the legions, no place at the war council, no claim on the kingdom's future. I had received it kneeling under a mosaic of gods, and it would be carved into the kingdom's records for the rest of my life. I stood up when I was told to stand. I bowed when I was told to bow. The rest of the day passed the way ceremonies pass, with food and music, and a great deal of looking past me. By evening, I was a different boy than the one who had walked in. The court called it a humiliation. I called it a memory I had been missing. The gods had not insulted me. I just did not know yet that they had armed me. 3 years went by, the way 3 years do when you have nothing to do with them. I was 15 the day my brother's ceremony was scheduled, and the castle was in the kind of organized panic that comes before a coronation rehearsal. Servants ran. Steel was polished. The kitchens were producing food at a rate that suggested an army. Nobody had any time for me, which suited me, because the only place I had ever wanted to spend my time was where the maids worked. The backyard was past the colonnade and behind the kitchens. Laundry hung in long white rows. Stone tubs steamed. The maids called it their kingdom, which was the most accurate description anyone had ever given a section of the castle. I went there because I had a skill for which there was no court use and a fundamental need to use it anyway. I had spent 3 years quietly improving their work, a trick for getting wine out of silk, a technique for whitening cuffs. The maids accepted my advice the way someone accepts a useful neighbor, gratefully, without making a production of it. Nobody told my father. That afternoon, a girl named Lara came running with a stained robe in her arms, and tears already gathering. The robe was my brother's. He had stained it on purpose. It was a small ink stain smeared deliberately across the chest, the kind he had been making for as long as he had been able to walk. "My prince," Lara whispered. "The head maid will throw me out for this. He will say I did it. He always says I did it." "He won't," I said. I took the robe. The ink had not set yet. I held it in both hands and used the only thing I had been good at since I was 12. The stain came out the way they always came out, the way water leaves cloth when the sun decides it is time. The fabric warmed under my palms and went clean. By the time I handed it back to her, you could not have proved a stain had ever been there. "Don't say a word about it." I gave her the robe. "If my father hears that I'm using my skill for the staff is the one who pays." Lara nodded with both hands clutching the cloth. The head maid had appeared behind her in the doorway, arms folded, the way head maids appear behind their juniors when they want to remind everyone whose backyard this actually was. Agnes had been at the castle longer than I had been alive. She watched Lara go and turned to me with the half-amused, half-resigned expression she had been giving me since I was 8. "You are going to ruin them, you know." "I'm not ruining them." "You are." Her arms folded a little tighter. "You've made them think every problem has a quiet boy in a blue tunic to solve it. They're already solving them," I said. "I'm just standing nearby." She looked at me the way she looked at me when she was deciding whether to scold me or feed me. She decided, in the end, to do neither. She just shook her head and went back inside. I stood by the tubs for a moment, watching the afternoon stretch toward evening. Somewhere in the front of the castle, my brother was being measured for the robe he would wear to his divine oracle ceremony tomorrow. Somewhere on the 3rd floor, my father was deciding what to do with the spare son he had carried for 3 years like a debt. I thought, not for the first time, that what I really wanted was a small house in a quiet country and a row of stained things to put right one at a time. and nobody who would ever ask me to be a prince again. I came around the colonnade on my way back to my rooms. My brother was waiting for me. I knew before I saw him. The colonnade had a particular silence when he was in it. The silence of staff making themselves small. He had our father's nose and our mother's mouth, and absolutely none of our mother's softness. He was wearing the embroidered jacket they had finished for the ceremony. He had heard about the robe. He stepped into the gap between two columns to block the path, the way he always did when he wanted me to either go around him or apologize. What he said was not worth quoting in full. The shape of it was that I was playing maid in the backyard, that the title fit me, that he was going to receive an occupation tomorrow worthy of an arclight, and that once the occupation was confirmed, there would no longer be any reason for the kingdom to keep two princes. He smiled when he said the last part. The smile was the part that had taken him years of practice. "Congratulations," I said. I tried to step around him. He told me, in the voice he reserved for pronouncements, that he wanted me in the front row tomorrow, so I could watch. I went around him without responding. Behind me, I heard him laugh once. The small laugh of a boy who had not yet learned that the people who laugh longest are usually the ones who have least to laugh about. I did not look back. My rooms were on the western tower. I climbed the stairs slowly. I sat at the window for a while and watched the courtyard fill up with banners for tomorrow's ceremony. I did not know yet that I would not see tomorrow's ceremony from any room in this castle. That evening, the summons came. Two guards I had known since boyhood walked me down the central corridor without meeting my eyes. The throne room was lit for an audience that had not been announced to me. The whole court was there. My father was on the throne. My brother was on the dais beside him in fresh robes, smiling the smile he had been practicing. The guards bound my wrists in front of me with a rope that had been prepared in advance. I did not fight them. There was nothing in fighting them that would change the shape of the next half hour. My father did not stand. He had made his decision before opening his mouth, the way he always did. He told the court that I had been considered for treason. The case was not strong. The case did not need to be. He told the court that the kingdom required clarity, and that a son who had been declared one rank and never met it was a stain on the line. That word was the one he chose, stain. I noted it because cleaners notice stains. My brother was given the floor. He announced his occupation, Conqueror. The word landed in the room the way he had wanted it to land, with the soft applause of a court already practiced in pretending not to be afraid. My father turned to me and said the words that made the court applause stop. He told me not to call him father again. He said the value of a speck of dust like me had vanished. He said farewell to the greatest stain in the history of the kingdom. He said it the way a man closes a ledger. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The mages came forward then, 2 of them. I had seen them in the lower halls many times. They did not look at me now. They lifted their hands. The light of the teleport gathered around me the way water gathers around a body about to sink. My brother, on the dais, said something just loud enough for me to hear, about spares, about discarding. The exact words don't matter. What stayed with me was the quiet pleasure in his voice. I kept my eyes on my father. I had nothing to say to him. He had not asked me to say anything. He had not asked me anything ever that I could remember. The light closed. The throne room left. The forest was not what I expected a death sentence to look like. There were trees, obviously, and a particular kind of silence that meant the things making noise had already noticed me and decided not to. My hands were still tied. My clothes had picked up a truly impressive collection of forest floor debris on the way down, which under the circumstances seemed like the least important problem I had. I started cleaning anyway. I knelt on the moss. I worked the skill loose around the edges of the tunic, the way I always did when I had to do it without my hands moving. The skill did not care that my wrists were bound. The skill had never required hands. The dirt lifted off the linen in a thin haze and dispersed somewhere I could not see. The hem went white again, then the sleeves, then the dark patch over the knee. The knot in my chest, the one that had been there since the throne room, loosened a little. It always did when I cleaned. That was the part nobody had ever managed to explain to me. Why a skill that made me feel like myself could be the thing they had decided to erase me for. My father had used that word twice now, stain. He had used it like a verdict. I had heard it like an instruction. I worked through the rest of the dirt one section at a time. The forest watched without making a sound. The light through the canopy was the color of old jade. Somewhere very far away, a bird called once and stopped. I should have been afraid. I had been told my whole life that the cursed forest was the worst death the kingdom could give a man. I had been told it for so many years that the words had gone through me like water through a sieve and left no shape. I was sitting on the moss in clean noble's clothes with my hands tied in front of me, and the only thing I could think clearly about was a stain on the cuff that the skill kept missing. Then a roar went through the forest. It came from above and behind me. The trees did not move. The sound was so deep that my ribs noticed before my ears did. The light dimmed in a way that had nothing to do with sunset. A shadow opened across the clearing the way a shutter opens. I looked up. A dragon was coming down. It was black. Not the black of healthy scales, the black of something soaked in ink and left to dry. The wings were enormous. The teeth, when it opened its mouth, were yellow with old grime, smeared with a haze that the animal corner of my brain recognized as wrong. Not dirty, wrong. The dragon decided, somewhere above the canopy, that I was its meal. It dropped through the trees with absurd speed. I scrambled to my feet with my wrists still bound, and my heart suddenly loud enough that I could hear it instead of the forest. The dragon's chest expanded. The fire was coming. I had 2 seconds before the fire reached me. I looked at the teeth. The teeth were filthy. I will not be able to explain why my brain did what it did. Maybe the part of me that had been a cleaner in another life. Whatever it was, I aimed the skill the way I had aimed it at the robe earlier that day, and I cleaned the dragon's teeth. The grime came off. A pale haze drifted away from the jaws like fog off a river. The fire did not come. The dragon's mouth was still open. The chest was still expanded. Something had broken in the connection between the breath and the throat and the thing the teeth were supposed to channel. The dragon stopped mid-dive, hit the moss in a controlled stumble, and shook its head violently the way a dog does after rolling in something rotten. I was still standing. I was supposed to be on fire. I looked at the dragon and the dragon looked at me, and in the place where there should have been hate, I saw only confusion. The black on its scales was the same wrongness I had cleaned off its teeth in larger volume. It was not paint. It was not soot. It was something that had been put on this animal a long time ago, and it had been deeper and louder than any creature underneath it. I felt the urge to clean it, the same urge as the robe, not bigger, the same. Then something inside me unfolded, the way a new room opens when you find a door you did not know was in the house. A new skill arrived. I knew its name without being told. Purification. I aimed it at the dragon and let it go. Light came out of me, white, blinding, the kind of light that is more silence than brightness. It hit the dragon and rolled across its body in waves. The black sheeted off. The wings, where it had been thickest, brightened in patches, at first and then everywhere. The yellowed teeth went pearl. The eyes I had been afraid to look at cleared. I stayed standing for as long as the skill needed me to stay standing. When it was done, I was kneeling. I had not chosen to kneel. The strain in my head was the strain of carrying something heavier than I was. The white dragon stood in the clearing where the black dragon had been. It looked at me with golden eyes, the way an animal looks at the only person in the room. It bowed its head, the slight bow of a thing that has just understood it is no longer a thing in pain. I tried to thank it. The clearing slid sideways. The forest dimmed. I did not feel myself fall. I woke to a warm flank against my shoulder and the smell of clean rain. It was sunset. The clearing was orange with the last hour of the day. The dragon, the white dragon, the same dragon, was curled around me with the patience of a cat. The rope that had bound my wrists was lying coiled neatly on the moss beside my hand. The dragon had taken it off me while I was unconscious. I could not think about that yet without sitting up, and I did not entirely trust myself to sit up. I sat up slowly. The dragon made a soft sound that was almost a purr, a sound a thing this size should not have been capable of. I checked my status. It was the most ordinary thing I could think of in a situation that had stopped being ordinary several minutes ago. The numbers had changed. I had been level 3 since my divine oracle ceremony. I had been level 3 the morning of my brother's. I had been level 3 when the throne room closed around me. The last entry in my level field now read level 18. Most of my stats were the bottom rank, which I had come to expect. My mental power read as rank A. The skills field had 2 entries instead of 1. Cleaning, purification. The cleaner had earned a promotion. It was the first promotion of my life. I did not stand for a long time. I let the dragon's flank rise and fall beside me. The forest was not silent the way it had been before. There were small sounds now. Insects, leaves, the wind moving through the canopy the way wind is supposed to move. I had purified the dragon, and a small section of forest seemed to have agreed to begin existing again. I did not know yet how far the effect would carry. I had no idea that other things in this forest had been waiting for a long time for someone to do exactly what I had just done. I looked at the dragon. She was a she. I had known it without being told. The way she was curled, the gold of her eyes. I would name her properly later, the way one names a friend, after I had something to give the name to that was not a stranger. For now, in my head, I called her Luna because the white of her in the sunset was the white the moon was supposed to be. I stood. The dragon stood with me, easily, lifting her head until it was higher than the tallest tree. "Thank you for the rope," I said. She made the soft sound again. "I don't know where I'm going. I don't think anyone here does." She looked at me as if to say that the location was not the issue. The walking was the issue. The going was the issue. Where could be decided later. I started walking. The white dragon walked behind me the way a bodyguard walks behind a person whose job they have just inherited. The forest, which was supposed to kill me, did not try anything else. The light got lower. Somewhere ahead of us, in a part of the cursed forest I had not yet seen, a tree as old as the kingdom was waiting to be cleaned. I did not know that yet. I just knew that I had something to do, and that for the first time in 15 years, nobody was going to laugh at me for doing it. We made camp at the edge of a small clearing. Luna had wanted to help with the fire. I had stopped her, politely. Her version of helping with a fire involved opening her jaws and exhaling something that would have removed the clearing, the trees around the clearing, and a respectable portion of the forest after that. I explained that what I wanted was a fire, not a crater. She understood eventually. Then she shrank. I had not known dragons could shrink. Apparently, they could. She went down to roughly the size of a large cat in the time it took her to think about it, padded over to my pile of kindling, and made a small flame that was exactly the right size. She looked very pleased with herself. I told her she was good at this. She made a sound somewhere between a purr and a growl that meant she agreed. We cooked fish. There were a lot of fish in this forest. I had grown up eating things that had been carried over mountains and prepared by men whose only job was to prepare food. And the fish I cooked over our small fire was, by some impossible margin, the best meal I had ever eaten. I checked my status while I ate because there was nothing else to do with the silence, and I was still trying to understand it. The numbers had not gone back. I was still level 18. My base stats had ticked up from the bottom rank to the rank above it. My mental power was still rank A, which was not a number that boys like me were supposed to see in their lives. Spirit, the stat that governed how often I could cast skills before collapsing, was higher than the rest of me put together. The math of who I was had quietly rearranged itself. I sat with that for a while. Then I looked at Luna, who had her chin on my knee like a friendly hound, and decided that the next thing this evening needed was a name. I tried a few. None of them stuck. The white of her was the white the moon was supposed to be, when the moon was clean and not the night yellow it usually showed up as. So, Luna, I said. She lifted her head. Her ears, small kitten-sized ears in this form, flicked once. "I think that's your name." Luna stood up on her tiny paws and butted her head against my chest, with enough force to knock me onto my back. Then she made a sound I had not heard from her before, a low rolling note that was unmistakably a yes. The fire crackled. The forest, for the first time since I had landed in it, sounded like a forest. Somewhere far above us, a real bird called a real call. I would have laughed if I had remembered how. The night had taken a long time to arrive. The day had taken a longer time. It was not a bad night. The next morning, Luna was full size again, and I was on her back. I had no idea how to ride a dragon. Luna had no idea how to be ridden. We worked it out the way two people who do not speak each other's language work out a doorway, slowly, with apologies and a small amount of bruising. By the time the sun was fully up, I was hooked into the ridge between her shoulders, with my hands in the warm space behind her crest, and we were several hundred feet above the trees. The cursed forest from above was bigger than I had been told. It went on. The shape of it was not the rough oval I had memorized in the maps. It was a continent unto itself, a green ocean with the dark of unhealthy patches scattered through it like bruises on fruit. The kingdom had told me this place was a death sentence, and I had pictured a forest. The kingdom had drawn me a map of an ocean and called it a forest. I pointed Luna in a long, lazy spiral, looking for somewhere to live. We crossed rivers I had not known existed. We passed over a quiet lake where something below the water was big enough to make the surface ripple in a circle the size of a house. We went over a section of forest where the leaves were the color of healthy moss and not the strange jade I had landed in. There were places, scattered through the wider region, that did not feel cursed at all. Then, in the southeast, the trees stopped. They did not stop the way a forest stops at a clearing. They stopped the way blood stops where a wound begins. There was a black expanse, perfectly circular, and at the center of it was a tree. The tree was wrong. I had used that word once already, the day before, about the dragon's teeth. I would learn over the next year that the word was the most accurate one I had for this entire territory. The tree was huge, easily the size of any building I had grown up in, which was not a small building. Its trunk was black. Its leaves, where they hung, were the color of ink left to dry. The shape of it was the shape of a tree that had been a different tree before something had happened to it. I felt the same urge I had felt for the dragon. Not bigger, not smaller, the same. I leaned forward and asked Luna if she could get me close. She made a sound that was clearly skeptical and clearly going to do it anyway. We started to descend. The tree noticed us at about 100 feet. Black leaves came up at us like arrows. Luna twisted in the air. Half a dozen leaves went past where my shoulder had been a second earlier. She inhaled to use her breath weapon. I told her not to. I told her, in the loudest voice I had, that burning was the same as running away, and the only way through this was to clean it. She growled at me in what I was learning to recognize as her exasperated growl. Then she dodged the next volley, and I aimed my skill, the new one, the supreme one, at the leaves themselves. They stopped being arrows. They turned green. They drifted to the ground like ordinary leaves on an ordinary day. While Luna circled, I heard a voice. It was not in my ears. It was inside my head, the way the gods had spoken at my divine oracle ceremony, but quieter, smaller, in pain. It said 3 words and then said 3 more, and then said 3 more. It called me a guide. It called me a purifier of taint. It called me the protector of the world. It asked for help. I did not know what to do with the voice, so I did the only thing I knew how to do. Luna landed me near the trunk. The moment her feet touched the corrupted ground, the white of her began to gray at the toes. The same wrongness that had been on her body the day before was lifting off the soil and reaching for her. I pushed her, physically pushed her, with both palms against her flank, back into the air. I purified the gray on her feet as she rose. She did not want to leave me. I made her. The tree's roots came at me from below, black whips, thick as my arm. I purified them. They went green. The trunk shrieked, not in sound, but in the part of my brain that the voice was using. I walked toward it. I do not remember how many times I cast purification. The number stopped mattering after the 3rd. I cast it on the bark in front of me. I cast it on the bark above me. I cast it on the leaves coming down. I cast it on the air, which was clogged with the wrongness, and the air went transparent. I went around the trunk and cast it on the back. I came back to the front and cast it on the heart. The strain in my head was the strain of carrying something heavier than I was. I kept doing it anyway. The cleaning had a stubborn stain rhythm to it that I had known since I was 12 and a Japanese dry cleaner before that. And stubborn stains did what stubborn stains did, which was come out eventually if you did not stop. The black sheeted off the bark like wet ink off oiled paper. A pillar of light went up from the tree to the clouds. I felt the clouds notice. I felt something far larger than the clouds notice. The tree shed the last of its corruption in a long, shaking exhale. I had time to be glad before the world tilted. The clearing slid sideways. The tree, now green, the leaves now the right green, came at the sky from the wrong direction. I did not feel myself fall. I woke with my head in someone's lap. This was unusual for several reasons. The most pressing one was that the someone was not someone I had ever met. The second was that we were sitting in a clearing that had not existed an hour ago. The corruption was gone. The soil was the kind of dark brown that grows things. And the tree behind us was a tree the way trees were supposed to be. Huge, alive, very green. The someone was a young woman with pale skin and waves of green hair the color of new leaves. Her eyes were emeralds in the literal sense. She was wearing what looked like a layered shift made of overlapping leaves, soft and natural, the kind of garment that grew with the person inside it rather than being made for them. Her hand was on my forehead. She had been waiting for me to wake up. "You finally woke up," she said. I tried to find a sentence and lost it. I sat up too quickly. The clearing tilted again, then settled. The young woman watched me with the patience of a person who had been waiting much longer than I had been asleep. Luna was about 30 feet away, curled around a sun-warmed boulder, watching the proceedings with what I was beginning to recognize as her smug expression. She had clearly already met the new arrival. She had clearly approved. "You purified the tree," the young woman said. "I did. You did not stop." "No." She looked at me as if I had answered a question she had already known the answer to, but had wanted to hear out loud. Then she smiled. The smile rearranged her face into something more ancient than her appearance suggested. "Good," she said. She told me, in the slow, precise voice of a person who had not used speech in a very long time, what I had done. The skill the kingdom had given me at 12, the one the court had laughed about, the one my own father had used as a reason to call me a stain. That skill was not a laundry skill. It had never been a laundry skill. It was the highest rank exorcism authority in the divine system, the one power that could meet a divine curse and undo it. The gods had not insulted me. They had armed me for the only war that mattered. She told me what she was. She was a great spirit. She had been born to purify this forest. She had been afflicted by the same divine curse she had been built to fight, and the curse had folded her into the tree and slowly turned her against her own purpose. For centuries, she had been the warden of a prison the prison had made of her. She had been losing. I was waiting for someone with the authority to end it, she said. I was beginning to think no one would come. I came by accident. No, she said. You came on purpose. The accident was that you thought it was an accident. I let that sit. She asked me to stay. The asking was the hardest sentence she had used since I had woken up. It cost her something to speak it the way it had cost the tree something to call to me through the corruption. The forest was vast. There were sections of it she had never reached. There were spirits she had not heard from in too long. She could not do this alone. She had been alone long enough to know. I told her I would. I had not even paused to think about it, which surprised me a little when I noticed it. I told her about the throne room and the exile, and the fact that walking out of this forest would get me executed, and walking back in would get me eaten, and that as far as places to spend the rest of my life went, this one had a tree and a dragon, and now her. And that was already more than I had been promised. She listened to my story without moving. When I finished, she made a small sound that I did not recognize at the time. The sound I would learn was the sound she made when something hurt her. She told me she was sorry. She did not specify for what. I did not ask. Then she stood up. She put a hand on my shoulder. She told me her true name. The name was a long string of syllables that meant the tree at the center of the world, and it was the kind of name only spoken once. She told me to call her Idrasil. I told her I would. The deal between us was made. The contract was small. The contract was enormous. She said the name, and I said something back. Not words I chose, but words that arrived. A faint warmth started in my chest and went outward, the way light fills a room when a door opens. When it was done, my status had a new line in it, a new skill, Spirit Eye. I tested it. I looked at Yggdrasil. The skill let me see what someone was, beneath what they appeared to be. Yggdrasil was, the word that arrived was the word ancient. She was older than my country. She was older than my family's name. I turned my head toward Luna. The skill looked at her. The skill kept looking at her. The number it returned was not a number. It was a row of zeros that started before I expected them to, and kept going for longer than I had expected anything to keep going. Luna's level was 774. Her race was Dragon Tribe. Her occupation, the field where mine read Cleaning Master, read God Dragon. I looked at the dragon I had been sleeping next to, the dragon I had cooked fish next to, the dragon I had ridden through a sky I had not known existed. You are a god, I said. Luna inclined her head with great dignity, as if she had been waiting for someone to notice, and was only mildly disappointed it had taken this long. And you have been letting me make terrible jokes at you. She thumped her tail. The sound was the sound a god makes when the god is amused. I sat there for a while with my hand on her flank. Yggdrasil sat next to me. The great tree above us was alive again. I could feel it, the way you feel a house being lived in. The forest beyond the clearing was quieter than it had been the day before, which was the kind of quiet that came when the worst things had been told to leave and were considering it. I had a home. I had a companion who was, technically, a god. I had an ancient great spirit who had decided I was the answer to a problem she had been carrying for centuries. I had also, if I was being honest, a job. The job was the same job the gods had named when I was 12. The job had only changed in scale. The cleaner, I thought, had earned a promotion that was actually 2 promotions. I was going to have to ask for a third one before the end of the year, just to make the math correct. Luna's tail thumped again. I dreamed about Luna that night. Not exactly about her. The way contracts work in this world is that some part of you starts to know some part of the people you have bonded yourself to, in a way you have not asked permission for. The dream that came to me was not mine. It was Luna's, replayed at low volume, the way the wind brings you the shape of a song from a far valley. She had been small, smaller than her flock. She had been born without the ability to use dragon's breath, which in her culture was the ability that made you a dragon and not a lizard with wings. They had called her weak. They had not been gentle about it. She had been chased through her own sky for a long time. One day, she had hidden in a place she should not have hidden in, a sealed hollow under a black mountain, and the thing inside the seal had reached out for her. She had fled with it inside her. and in the months after, she had not been her. She had been the thing inside the seal, wearing her body, learning the breath weapon she had been mocked for never having, using it at random until she found someone tied up on the floor of a clearing in a forest she had not chosen. I woke up at the spot where I cleaned her teeth. The dream was the dream. I sat up slowly. Luna was curled in the grass next to me, breathing the slow, steady breaths of a dragon at rest. I put my hand on her flank, and she made a small sound that was not awake and was not distressed, and was, I thought, the sound a thing makes when it has been heard for the first time. I did not say anything. The dream was her dream. The least I could do was let her share it without being interrogated. The day rolled out around us in pieces. Yggdrasil told me that morning, while we ate fish she had not been required to eat and yet enjoyed, that the purification of the great tree had been felt across the continent. There was a duke in the north who had stood up at his window and smiled, who I would not meet for a year. There was a young emperor in the west who had told his secretary, with the expression of a man making a calculation he did not want to make in public, that the balance of the continent had just changed. There was a priestess in the south, in the Holy Celestia theocracy, who had stopped praying mid-sentence and named what had happened: the power to break evil. There was, and Yggdrasil paused before this part, with a hint of dry amusement I had not yet learned to read, a kingdom in the east, the kingdom that had thrown me away, that had felt absolutely nothing, because the kingdom did not have anyone in it whose job it was to notice. They were busy preparing for my brother's coronation as crown prince. They did not yet know I was alive. I let that sit. It did not need a reaction from me. We built that day. Not a house, that would come later, but the bones of a place to live. A lean-to against the south side of the great tree. A circle of stones for a fire. A line for laundry, which Yggdrasil watched me put up with the expression of a person watching a cleric arrange an altar. Luna patrolled the air above the canopy and brought back fish whenever she remembered I needed to eat. Yggdrasil extended Spirit's blessing in a wider radius. A soft barrier I could not see, but the local monsters could, because none of them came near. I asked her, sitting against the trunk that evening, whether she wanted me to sleep inside the tree. There was a hollow in there she had offered. I told her I had decided to sleep outside. The tree was what I said. She got embarrassed in a way that was very ancient and very small, and I slept under the lean-to with Luna curled around me like a wall. The cursed forest was not silent that night. It was just quiet. There is a difference. I had not learned it yet. A few days later, the barrier got restless. I had not known a barrier could be restless. Yggdrasil had. She came up out of the tree with a sour expression and told me that something at the southern edge of her spirit's blessing was wrong. Not breaking the barrier, but pressing against it the way an infection presses against the inside of a wound. We needed to look. I picked up a stick in case picking up a stick would help. It would not, but the gesture made me feel useful, and we went south. The southern edge was a swamp. The trees there were thinner and twisted. The ground was the soft, rotten brown of a place where water did not move, and the air smelled of standing rain. I disliked it the way a cleaner dislikes mildew, personally. Two people were on the ground at the center of the swamp. A girl was on her back. A boy was face down a few feet from her. Both of them had pointed ears that I recognized from books my mother had read me when I was small. Elves. The girl was conscious and barely. The boy was not moving. "Please," the girl said. The word was scraped out of a throat that had been screaming for too long. "Please run." I knelt next to her. She tried to push me away with the last of her strength. She got out a sentence about her brother, that he was cursed, that he attacked everything that came near him, that he could not stop himself. The brother sat up. He sat up the way a body sits up when the curse is the thing doing the sitting. His eyes were wrong. The black was the same wrongness I had seen on Luna and on the great tree. He launched himself at me with a roar that did not have any words in it. "Move!" Yggdrasil shouted. I did not move. I had a clearer view of his face from where I was, and the angle was right, and his motion was, frankly, slow. I cleaned the mud off his face as he reached me. The skill, cleaning, the small one, the one the court had laughed at, washed the dirt away. He was over my head when Yggdrasil's branches caught him. Wood whipped up out of the swamp ground and wrapped his wrists, his arms, his ankles. He thrashed. The girl on the ground covered her mouth with her hands. "You are an idiot," Yggdrasil informed me, very calmly. "You are a complete idiot. I had it in hand. You did not have it in hand. You had a fist coming for your head. I had a face that needed cleaning." She closed her eyes briefly, the way one closes one's eyes when one has run out of words for a person. I put both hands toward the bound boy. and used purification. The black on him went the way black always went under that skill. It did not put up a fight. It came off in a single long exhale, like a person taking off a coat that had been too heavy too long. The boy slumped. His face went pale and human and tired. Yggdrasil's branches loosened around him and lowered him to the moss. The girl saw the curse leave her brother and made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. She tried to crawl to him and her arms gave out. I caught her under the shoulders before she went into the mud. She looked up at me with an expression I did not know how to read. Gratitude, mostly, but with a layer of something else underneath. The way a person looks at someone who has just done a thing they had been told no one in the world could do. Thank you, she said. The word was small. It was also enormous. He'll be all right. I shifted my hold to support her better. We should get you both somewhere that isn't a swamp. Luna landed 20 feet away, with the soft thud of a creature being polite about her landing weight. The girl looked up, saw the dragon, said the kind of word elves say, in the kind of voice elves use when they are being careful around a being that could remove their tribe from the map by accident. Luna lowered her head to me, then to the girl. Yggdrasil told her, with the precision of someone making an introduction at a court function, that this was Luna and Luna was a friend. The girl absorbed this, then she fainted. I let her down gently. I checked her brother. He was breathing. I checked him for any other wounds. There were none. The curse had been the only thing wrong. It had been bad enough. I stood up. My head felt full. The skill had not exhausted me the way it had at the great tree, but it had cost something. Every cast did. I checked my status, because checking my status was what I did now after I purified things. The level field had moved, level 47, from level 18, in not very many days. I stared at the number until Yggdrasil cleared her throat and reminded me, gently, that we still had 2 unconscious people in the mud. We loaded them onto Luna's back the way one loads cargo onto a polite, world-reshaping mount. Luna lifted off. We headed home. Flora woke up at sunset. She woke up clean. Yggdrasil had insisted, while I cleaned her brother's clothes, that I clean hers as well. The swamp had been on her too, in places I had ignored out of habit, and the girl had appreciated for the same reason. She sat up on the moss in a borrowed wrap, saw her brother breathing peacefully on a bedroll across from her, and then saw me, and then saw Yggdrasil leaning against the trunk of a tree larger than any tree she had ever seen, and then saw Luna asleep in a coil at the edge of the clearing, the size of a small house, and she did not faint again, but it was a near thing. I sat down next to her with a bowl of fish. Eat. We can talk after. I am sorry, she said. I am sorry for— Eat first, she ate, slowly. Her brother, Peter, he murmured his name when she nudged him awake, woke up an hour after she did. He apologized to me for things he did not remember doing. I told him that not remembering meant they were not his to apologize for. He looked at me as if I had said something he did not know was allowed. They told their story. Peter had been carrying the divine curse for several years. Flora had developed a small skill that suppressed it, never cured it, just held it down enough for him to stay himself. The elders of their village had decided 3 weeks ago that the suppression was failing and that the cleanest answer was an unkindness they could justify. The siblings had run. They had been running for 2 of those weeks. The swamp had been the place where the running stopped working. I asked them to live with us. I asked it the way one asks anyone to dinner. Flora stopped chewing. Peter froze with his bowl halfway to his mouth. You do not know us, Flora said. You do not know me either, I said. We can fix that. The tree is safe. Yggdrasil's barrier keeps the monsters out. There is room. I do not have many neighbors yet. Yggdrasil chose this moment to make her formal introduction. She floated forward with both feet not entirely on the ground and announced, with the dignity of an empress and the visible joy of a child showing off a hand-drawn picture, that she was the great spirit of this tree, that she was contracted with me, and that I was very important. Please be aware. The siblings stared. Yggdrasil basked. Luna woke up briefly. She bowed her enormous white head at the visitors, the way a cat bows, with the implication that the visitors were now under her protection and should be appreciative. Then she went back to sleep. Peter and Flora looked at each other. They had the look of 2 people who had just accepted a very large gift they were not going to be able to refuse without insulting the giver. We will earn our keep, Flora said. You will eat dinner first. The rest can wait. She nodded. Peter nodded. They ate. The evening folded over us the way evenings do when the day has gone better than anyone expected. I went to bed under the lean-to with the lean-to, now containing the warm sounds of 2 more sleepers and a very smug spirit standing guard. I did not yet know that the village had begun, that night, to be a village. I just knew that there were 2 more people in the clearing, and the math of who I was responsible for had quietly rearranged itself again. Cleaners were used to that. The pile always grew. It was Flora who suggested the Dwarven village. We had been at the Great Tree for 2 weeks. We had a lean-to that had become a small house. We had laundry lines. We had the beginnings of a garden that Peter was tending with the seriousness of someone running a small embassy. We did not have proper tools. The knife I had been using to whittle steaks had a handle I had carved out of a log, and the log objected to being a handle. Flora pointed out, gently, that there was a Dwarven village a day and a half south. Dwarves made tools. Tools could be obtained from dwarves the way fish could be obtained from rivers, with patience, with currency, and without setting anything on fire. She had saved a small purse of coins from the time before her village had decided to kill her brother. She offered it. I refused. She insisted. I refused again. She pointed out, politely, that I could keep refusing forever, and we would still need tools. I accepted the money. I told her, looking at her and at Peter both, that the household had no hierarchy in it. The money was the household's, not mine. She looked at me for a moment in a way I would have read better if I had been older. We left at dawn the next morning. Idrasil stayed at the tree. Her range was a few miles around the trunk, no more, and she could not come with us beyond it. Luna was not within range either, but she could fly. We arranged that she would patrol overhead and stay out of sight. She did not love this plan. She agreed to it because she had agreed that she would not destroy any human settlements without consulting me first, which was the kind of agreement I had not expected to need to make and was glad I had. The forest, as we walked, was different from the forest I had landed in. The cursed parts felt thinner now. The light came through the canopy, the way light is supposed to. We crossed a river where Peter caught 2 fish in 5 minutes with his bare hands. We made camp at sunset by a wider stretch of the same river. We slept under a sky that had stars in it for the first time in my recent memory. I had not had a journey in 15 years that involved going somewhere because I wanted to. The walking did not feel like walking. It felt like the first part of something. Day 2, mid-morning, we found something on the path that did not belong on it. It was a wolf, or it was the shape of a wolf. 4-legged, low-slung, mouth open. It was made of the same wrongness as the dragon and the great tree had been, condensed into a small predatory body. The pressure rolling off it was the kind that made the air heavier than it should have been. Peter froze. Flora's hand went to the staff she carried for healing, defensive. I stepped past them. I did not draw a weapon. I did not have a weapon. I looked at the wolf and the wolf looked back, and the only thing I could see, when I looked, was the shape of a stain that had decided to walk. I was a cleaner. The stain was not technically an opponent. It was a surface waiting to be addressed. I cast Purification. The wolf came apart like wet ink under a strong light. The pressure went with it. The path was clear in the time it had taken Flora to inhale. Peter was the first to speak. He said something quiet that was somewhere between a question and a prayer. Flora, who had not had to use her staff, lowered it carefully and did not say anything for a long moment. "It was just dirt," I said. Flora looked at me with the expression I had come to recognize as her "you are going to need to explain," that better look. To me it was. The wolves are a kind of stain. I cleaned it. That was the whole thing. She decided. The way she decided most things. Not to argue with me about it where Peter could hear. We walked on. Luna's shadow passed once over the trees above us, slow and patient. The shadow of a thing that had been ready to descend and had concluded, with disappointment, that her services were not required. We arrived at noon. The village was on fire. Not literally, but it was the kind of place where you could see the work of fire if it had been allowed to have its way. Houses had been hit. A goat pen was empty. Smoke was coming from somewhere I could not identify. A man 4 feet tall and 3 feet wide, with a beard down to his belt and a hammer that should not have been able to swing as fast as he was swinging it, was holding off 3 of the same kind of wolf I had cleared from the path that morning. He saw us and shouted something about a shelter. He was telling us where to flee. He had clearly assumed we were merchants who had walked into the wrong day. I purified the 3 wolves around him. He stopped mid-swing. The hammer hung in the air at the height of a wolf head that was no longer there. He turned his entire body to look at me. He was, I would learn, the chief of the village. But at that moment, he was only an angry small man at the edge of a fight he had been losing. "Are there more in the village?" I asked. He told me there were. The young dwarves had run with their weapons toward the mountain, drawing the worst of them off. He pointed with the hammer. I looked at the village. I looked at it the way I had looked at the great tree, at the whole of it, not the specific. There was a basic principle I had lost track of for several minutes. The principle was that when a garment is dirty all over, you do not clean the cuff, and then the collar, and then the hem. You clean the garment. I cast Purification on the village. It rolled outward in a wave I could not see but could feel. A soft kind of pressure that did not push anything physical but pushed everything else. Every wrongness forest inside the radius of the village dissolved at the same time. The young dwarves up the slope reported 20 seconds later that the wolves they had been fighting had vanished mid-swing. The chief lowered his hammer. "Lad," he said, in the rustic voice of a man trying very hard to be polite to a person whose nature he had not yet identified. "You mind telling me your trade?" "I clean things," I said. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he laughed. It was the laugh of a man who had decided to wait until later to have any of his other reactions. The chief's name was Dorado. He sat us at his table, gave us cups of something that I recognized as a drink only by context, and listened to Flora tell our story. She was careful. She did not name the elf village. She named only what had to be named, that they had fled, that I had taken them in, that we had come because we needed tools. Dorado listened without interrupting. When she was done, he gave us his word that the village would not speak of where they had gone. He said, with the simple gravity of a man saying a true thing, that the dwarves did not pay back life-saving help with ingratitude. We worked out tools. He would need a few days. The village had taken damage, and his smiths were repairing first. I told him we were in no hurry. I asked, while I waited, what the gleaming object on the wall behind him was. It was a scepter, or it was something the wall was treating as a scepter. The metal was corroded. The shape was clear, though. A tall, slender rod with a head of curved metal pieces that might have been wings or leaves or both. Dorado told me it was an heirloom of his line. It had no power anymore. It had not had power in a very long time. The chiefs of his village, he said with a half laugh, had been keeping it polished out of habit. I asked, because I am the kind of person who asks if I could touch it. He shrugged in the way old men shrug when a young man is about to do something harmless. He took it down. He set it in my hands. The scepter shed its skin. The corroded outer layer broke off in pieces, not crumbled, broken, the way a chrysalis breaks when the thing inside is done waiting. Underneath was a scepter that did not look like the same object. The metal was bright. The curved head, they were leaves, I could see them now, caught the firelight and reflected it back as something that was not firelight. The weight in my hand was the weight of a thing that had a mind about being held. Dorado dropped his cup. Flora, behind me, said something very quiet. I held the scepter without saying anything for what felt like a long time. The narration of the room, the sounds of the fire, of Peter's breath, of the wind outside, receded a little, the way sound recedes when a thought arrives that is bigger than the room. I did not know then what the scepter was. I only knew it was warm. The dwarves had a custom of gathering at the campfire on clear nights. Their reason was simple and old. The dark was the kind of dark, in their part of the forest, where neighbors had once gone missing. It was easier on everyone, on a clear night, to count the people you had not yet lost. So they sat around the fire. They drank. They watched each other. I sat with the scepter across my knees. The dwarves who came up to us looked at it the way one looks at a relic that has been on a wall their entire life. Some of them tried to touch it. The scepter would not be touched. When their hands met it, it slipped, not fell, but passed through the cup of the palm the way water does. They drew their hands back without being upset, the way people do when an object has answered a question, and the answer was the answer they expected. Dorado told me their history then. He told it the way a man tells a thing his grandfather had told him. The dwarves had been slaves. A long time ago, in a kingdom whose name no one in this clearing remembered, the dwarves had been used to make weapons. When that kingdom had decided that the cursed forest was too dangerous to send soldiers into, they had sent the dwarves instead for forging in the dangerous places. The forest had eaten many of them. One of them had been given the scepter by a god. Dorado was not specific about which one, and that one had stood up against the slavers and led his people to a place where they could be free. They had been free in the cursed forest ever since, which was a freedom the way being a fish in a barrel is a freedom, complete and very small. When he was done, I set the scepter down between us. I asked him, on the spot, if his village would consider relocating to the Great Tree. I told him about Yggdrasil's barrier. I told him about the safe radius. I told him there was room. I told him that the household at the tree was not exactly a village, but it had ambitions, and the dwarves would be welcome to bring those ambitions with them. Dorado looked at me without saying anything for a while. Then he turned to the assembled village and asked them. The dwarves talked it over. It took less time than I had expected. When they were done, Dorado stood up, walked to where I was sitting, and bowed. Not the bow of a small man to a tall one, but the bow of a chief to whatever I was about to be. "We will come," he said. The migration started 2 days later. The dwarves came in a slow procession. Carts, anvils, half-built bellows wrapped in oiled cloth, children riding on the carts, the chief at the front. I led them through the parts of the forest where the curse was thinnest. We took longer than I had walked alone with Flora and Peter, because dwarves with carts were not dwarves alone, but the trip was uneventful. Yggdrasil's barrier opened to receive us as if the barrier had been told to expect company. She came out of the tree as the first carts arrived. The dwarves stopped where they stood. A great spirit was the kind of being most dwarves spoke of only in songs. Yggdrasil understood her own effect. She stood very still and looked at them, ancient and small and green-haired. And after a long pause, she made a small formal gesture of welcome that the dwarves recognized without ever having been taught it. They bowed to her. She accepted the bow. She told them, in the slow, precise way she had told me the truth about my own skill, that they were welcome and that she would extend her protection to them. She said it the way a mother makes a promise. The dwarves wept a little, quietly. The chief did not. He had clearly been crying for 2 days already. That afternoon, while the dwarves were unloading, Dorado caught my elbow. He told me, with the formal ceremony of a man who had thought about exactly how he was going to say it, that the dwarves were now under my leadership. The decisions, he said, would still be his to bring to me. The work would still be theirs to do, but the village's direction, henceforth, was mine. I told him I was not fit to be a leader. Dorado, in the way only old chiefs can do, ignored me. I told Flora I was not fit to be a leader. Flora smiled, very small, and informed me that I should give up. I told Peter I was not fit to be a leader. Peter, beaming, said he thought I was great at it. Yggdrasil, who had been watching all 3 of these conversations with visible amusement, drifted up to me with my new scepter floating beside her. She had retrieved it from the carts and was holding it without touching it, in some way only spirits could, and remarked, in a voice that was meant to be casual and was not at all casual, that this object was the divine right scepter. And was I aware that it had a name? I had not been aware. She said the name. She did not explain. Before I could ask what that meant, a cluster of dwarves at the western edge of the clearing began to shout. A particular word, repeated several times, and rising in pitch. The word was dragon. I had forgotten to introduce Luna to the dwarves. I started walking very fast in the direction of the shouting. The cleaner, I thought, had earned a 3rd promotion now. The cleaner was not entirely sure he had been consulted on it. The dwarves had been with us for 8 days, and the village had begun to look like a village. There were houses, not finished, but framed and roofed and obviously houses. There was a well. There was a forge that made noise. There was a workshop. There was a pile of dirty work clothes the dwarves brought to me at the end of every day, because the dwarves had discovered, with the speed of a people who had spent generations being practical, that I was the most useful laundry service in the cursed forest. I cast wash 6 times in a row that morning. The clothes went from caked with rock dust and forge soot to the kind of clean that looked like someone had bought them new. I stood in the middle of a clearing in a forest that wanted to kill me, with a small army of dwarven shirts becoming pristine in front of me, and I felt the closest thing to professional satisfaction that I had felt in 2 lifetimes. Yggdrasil watched from a low branch above me. She was wearing a dress now, a sleeveless light green one-piece the dwarves had made her in their first week. She had asked me, several times, whether I liked it. I had answered yes, several times, while continuing to clean shirts. She had eventually stopped asking and started lightly hitting me on the head with one of her own branches in protest. I had not yet figured out the connection between the dress and the branch. The dwarves were calling me Lord Adrian now. The first time was an accident. Dorado had said it during a planning session, and the rest of the village had picked it up faster than they had picked up new tools. I had asked them, politely, to stop. They had not stopped. Yggdrasil found this enormously funny. I told her that nothing about my situation merited the title. She told me, with the small smile of a person delivering a fact, that I lived in the largest tree on the continent with a great spirit and a divine dragon, and that the dwarves were not technically wrong. I asked her, while cleaning the 7th shirt of the morning, why the divine right scepter would not respond to me anymore. I had tried, twice, to make it do anything since the dwarves had arrived. It had stayed an inert, beautiful object on its stand inside the great tree. She looked down at me from her branch. The smile got smaller. She told me the scepter was a sovereignty instrument. It needed a ruler's will to activate. The will was the part I currently lacked. I did not feel like a ruler. I felt like a person doing laundry. I went back to the laundry. The scepter could wait. I had 4 more shirts. The next afternoon, I tried to clean the forest. I had been thinking about it since I woke up. The cursed parts of the great forest were what was making everything outside our barrier dangerous. If I could expand my purification beyond the immediate range, if I could push it out the way Yggdrasil pushed her spirit's blessing, then the safe territory would grow, and the people who would inevitably come to live in it would have somewhere to live. I told Yggdrasil what I was going to try. She told me, in the polite voice she used when she was about to tell me I was being an idiot, that this was risky. I told her I knew. She told me she would back me. I climbed onto Luna's back. We flew to the highest hill on the edge of our protected zone. Yggdrasil hovered beside us. Luna's wings made a soft, regular thump in the air. I imagined the whole forest, not a section of it, not a stain on a sleeve, the whole thing. The trees, the soil, the rivers, the air, the curse running through them like rot through wood. I held the image. I cast purification. The skill went out from me in a wave that did not stop where I had stopped before. It pushed. It pushed harder. Yggdrasil shouted something. The wave kept going. Somewhere very far away, the curse pushed back. Not maliciously, just because it was a thing that had been there a very long time and was not going to leave at the request of one person, no matter who the person was. The strain in my head was the strain of carrying something significantly heavier than I was. The wave broke. I felt it break. A pillar of white light went up from the hill we were on and into the sky and through the cloud layer like a person putting a fist through a paper screen. I had time to be impressed before I went sideways off Luna's back. Luna caught me. I was unconscious before I felt her teeth in my collar. The pillar lasted, I would learn later, for a long minute. It was visible for miles. In a part of the cursed forest a long way to the south, a wolf-eared girl with a body that was wrong in a way I knew very well stopped catching fish in a river. She looked up at the pillar of light. She put down the fish. She started running. I woke up 2 days later. Flora informed me of this the moment my eyes opened. She had been sitting next to my bedroll for the better part of those 2 days. She had used her healing skill on the strain in my head until the strain was gone. She had not slept the way a person normally sleeps. I told her thank you. She told me not to do that again. Yggdrasil behind her told me, in a voice that did not contain any humor, that I was an idiot. I told her I knew. She told me then the actual result. The Pillar of Light had succeeded in clearing about 5% of the Great Forest's curse. 5. I had worked that hard for 5. The curse was older than my country. The curse was older than every country. It would not be cleaned in a single push, no matter how hard the push was. We would have to be patient, and I would have to not collapse like that again. Ever, please. I told her I would try. I had time to eat 1 bowl of Peter's stew before the next thing happened. Yggdrasil's head came up first. Her hand went up in a sharp gesture that meant, I had learned by now, incoming. The spirit's blessing was not just restless this time. It was breaking at one point. Something with a divine curse on it had reached the village's outer line and was coming through. It came out of the trees about 300 yards from where we sat. She was small, a wolf-eared girl my age, or thereabouts, slim, fast, 4-legged in the way she moved even though she was upright. Her body was sheathed in the same black wrongness I had seen on Luna and the great tree, condensed onto a shape that should have been someone's daughter. Her eyes were void black. She came across the Dwarven fields at a speed that the dwarves did not, in their entire careers as a people, possess. The dwarves shouted at us to stay back. They formed a line. I walked out past it. Yggdrasil shouted at me. I did not stop. I had cast purification on the dragon while I was still tied up in front of him. A girl on a field was not, comparatively, a different problem. She was on me in a second. The arms reaching for my throat were the strength of something that had several tons of force in a small frame. I cast the skill before her hands reached me. The black sheeted off her like a coat she had been wearing too long. She landed on her hands and knees in the soft dirt of the field. The black went off her in one long exhalation. Underneath the corruption was a beastkin girl with brown wolf ears and a brown wolf tail and a fall of brown hair that she had not been able to take care of in some time. Her clothes were elegant in the simple way beastkin clothing was elegant. A plain fitted tunic, fitted leggings, a belt with a bone handle on it. She looked at her own hands, the way a person looks at their hands after a long fever. Then she looked at me. She got up off the ground in a single movement. She closed the distance between us in another single movement. She put both her arms around me with the speed of someone correctly identifying a winner of a contest only she had been entered in, and she pinned me to the dirt of the field. "Found you," she said. She had a voice that was somewhere between a bark and a song. The face above mine was bright and clean and entirely fixed on me, with the focused certainty of a creature that had just settled the central question of her life and intended for everyone present to know. "My mate," she said. The dwarves around us were very quiet. Yggdrasil, behind us, made a sound that I had never heard from her. It was the sound a small empire makes the moment it realizes another small empire has just put a foot on its border. I tried to sit up. The girl on top of me weighed less than I had expected and would not move. She also looked extremely happy. I did not have a script for this exact situation, having spent most of my 15 years in a castle and the rest of my 15 years cleaning things in a forest. "I think there has been a misunderstanding," I said. "My mate," she said again, with the patience of a person correcting a small error. Behind us, the great tree made a sound that I would later recognize as Yggdrasil cracking a knuckle. We brought her back to the tree. This was a decision I had made in the field, to two parties' equal displeasure, Yggdrasil's, because the field had felt, briefly, like a venue for a kind of fight that would have damaged a small mountain, and the wolf-eared girls, because she had wanted to know whether we were going home together to her pack or to mine, and the speed of my walking suggested mine. She had told me, on the way, that her name was Sonia, that her pack had sent her out alone to find a mate, because Beastkin custom held that the worthy mate was the one who could defeat the thing that had cursed you, and I was the one who had defeated the thing that had cursed her, that she was therefore choosing me. She delivered all of this without breath, without hesitation, and without the slightest awareness that I had not yet agreed to any of it. At the tree, Yggdrasil was waiting. She had pulled herself up to a height that the great tree did not normally let her reach. Her branches were out. Her eyes were a green that I had not seen before, the green that comes before storms. She told Sonia, in the formal voice she used for state matters, that this clearing was where I lived, with her, and that the matter of who lived where was settled. Sonia looked at her. Sonia looked at me. Sonia, who, I would learn over the following months, did not understand subtext as a category, said cheerfully that we could share, and tried to take me by the arm. The tree's branches and Sonia's reflexes met in the air between us. Nothing in the clearing was in immediate danger of breaking, but everything in the clearing was aware that danger was on the table. Peter walked into the standoff with the stew. He walked in carefully. He set the pot down on the low table beside the fire. He looked at Yggdrasil. He looked at Sonia. He said, with the practical clarity of a young man who had been raised by sensible elves, that the stew was getting cold. He gestured with both hands toward the bowls. Sonia sniffed the air. Sonia sat down at the table. Yggdrasil's branches lowered, very slowly, in the way of a person putting away a weapon they would prefer not to have drawn but had not regretted drawing. She took her seat at the head of the table without looking at Sonia. I sat down between them, because I am the kind of person who sits down between them, and Flora set out the bowls without comment. I told Sonia, between mouthfuls, that I was not going to be her mate, that I was not going to her pack, and that if she wanted to stay at the village, she would have to do something for the field she had ruined when she came in, and for several days of dwarven labor she had interrupted. The terms were specific. Sonia, between her own enthusiastic mouthfuls, agreed to all of them with the speed of a person concluding a very good bargain. I told her that the agreement also meant she was not technically my mate. Sonia looked up at me with an expression of bright, sympathetic patience, the expression a person uses with someone who is about to learn something. Then she went back to the stew. I ate the rest of my bowl quietly. The cleaner, I noted to himself, had earned a third promotion he was definitely not consulted on, and now appeared to have inherited a wife. I was going to need to clarify this, probably for years. The village had been quiet for 2 weeks. We had finished my house, which the dwarves had insisted on building first, and the rest of the village had agreed about with the unanimous certainty of people who had decided the matter without consulting me. I had moved into it on the condition that the dwarves slept inside it with me until their own houses were ready. Sonia had been repairing the field she had ruined every day for 9 days. The repair work was, slowly, against her own objections, turning her into a member of the community. Peter had taken over the kitchen full-time. Flora had set up a small clinic under a canopy of woven branches near the great tree. I was at her clinic that morning because I had a blister. I had been farming. Sonia had offered to lick the blister better in the manner of beastkin first aid. I had declined. Flora used healing on it instead. The skin closed under her palm in the slow, comfortable way her healing always closed skin. She turned my hand over to check the inside and held it for a second longer than she needed to before letting go. She told me, in a voice so quiet it almost did not have a sound, that she still wished she had been able to save Peter herself, that her healing had only ever held the curse down, never lifted it, that if I had not come along, her brother would have. "You kept him alive," I said. long enough for me to come along. That is not nothing. That is the entire thing. She did not answer. She nodded once, looking at her own hands. Yggdrasil came out of the great tree at a speed she did not normally use. She did not float. She walked briskly, the way one walks when one needs to stop someone from doing something. She came to a stop in front of us. Her eyes were the green that came before storms, the same green she had used the day Sonia arrived. She told me, with the precision of someone counting very carefully, that 10 people were approaching the village from the south. Their aura was very close to Flora's, almost certainly elves, almost certainly Flora's tribe. Flora went the white that people go when they recognize a sentence before it has finished. They tracked Sonia's trail, I said. It was not a guess. It was the only path that made sense. Sonia had crashed across half the southern forest before reaching us. The elves' rangers would have read the corruption traces of her cursed run and followed. Flora got up. She was already preparing the sentence about leaving, about drawing them off, about not putting the village in danger. I have seen, in 15 years, several people prepare a sentence about sacrificing themselves. I have not yet met one whose sacrifice was the right answer. You are not going anywhere, I said, before she got the sentence out. She looked at me. I have a plan. Yggdrasil behind me said in the dry voice that meant she trusted me and did not trust the plan. I am very worried. I told her she would be fine. I told Flora, quietly, with the same conviction I had used in the Dwarven village when I had asked Dorado about the scepter, that she was not the problem. The problem was, I suspected, something I had seen before, in a smaller form, and could remove. I was going to ask the elves to come in for a wash. Flora's expression did not entirely understand the words, but it understood the tone. She nodded. Sonia, who had been pretending not to listen, asked from a distance whether she got to bite anyone. Not today. Tomorrow, possibly. Sonia accepted this and went back to whatever she had been doing. Flora and Peter walked behind me. We had brought them on purpose. They were why the elves were here, and the version of the meeting that did not involve them was a worse version. Yggdrasil had stayed at the village. Luna was somewhere overhead, where I had asked her to be, and where I had asked her not to land. The elves came through a gap in the trees in formation, 10 of them, armed, light leather, tall bows, short blades, the kind of gear elves used when they meant to go into a fight where they did not intend to lose anyone. They saw the path was clean, too clean by their standards, and stopped before they saw us. Their captain stepped forward, surveyed the unaffected ground with the suspicion of a man who had walked into a story that did not match his briefing, and only then noticed me standing in the path with my hands open at my sides. He told his squad to be ready. He asked, with the careful voice of a man addressing something he did not yet have the right name for, who I was. I clean things, I said. Hello. The squad was briefly confused. While they were briefly confused, I cast cleaning on them. The skill went over their armor and their cloaks, and the dust of 2 weeks of forest tracking, and the dried sweat of a long march, and dispersed all of it. They came out the other side, a unit that had abruptly been laundered. The captain looked at his own arm. Several of his archers looked at each other. Peter, behind me, made a small sound of suppressed laughter. The captain asked, with the dignity of a man whose footing had been stolen, why I had done that. You look like you'd had a hard week. Now, your 2 missing tribespeople are right behind me, and they are both alive, and Peter doesn't have the curse anymore. Whatever your reason for being out here was, the reason is not what you thought it was. He looked past me, saw Flora, saw Peter, saw the absence of black mist where there should have been black mist. He said, slowly, the words I had been hoping he would not say. He told me, in the careful voice of a man explaining a duty he could not put down, that the law of his village required Peter's death regardless. That a person who had carried the divine curse, even briefly, even cured, was forever subject to the rule. That the squad would have preferred to find Peter as a monster. It would have been simpler. But that the law applied either way. I looked at him longer than was polite. I looked at all of them. The spirit eye I had been given by Yggdrasil's contract was good for seeing what someone was. It was also, I had been learning since Sonia, good for seeing what was on someone, what had attached itself, what was riding their thoughts without them noticing. The captain and his squad had a film of something on them. Not the divine curse. The curse was distinctive, and this was not it. Sludge was the word that came to mind. The kind of sludge that gathers in a pipe over years, that you do not see until you take the pipe apart, that has been narrowing the flow without anyone realizing. It was on all of them. It had been there for a long time. Hold that thought, I said. I cast purification. The light went over them in the same wave that had taken the corruption off Luna and the great tree and Peter and Sonia. It was smaller this time. There was less of the wrongness on each elf, but it was the same skill. The pillars of soft light came up out of each of their bodies briefly and then settled. The squad stood very still. The captain blinked. He blinked again. The hard set of his jaw, which had been the jaw of a man holding a sentence in place, softened by degrees. He looked at his squad. They looked at him. He turned to me. He bowed. A low, formal bow, the bow a captain gives when a captain has decided he was wrong about everything, and asked, in a voice very different from the voice he had used a minute ago, whether I would forgive his squad for what they had been about to do. Yes, I said. He turned to Flora and Peter. He bowed to them too. They were, for a moment, too startled to bow back. I had no idea what I had purified. I had, in fact, asked myself the question while doing it. Sludge was the wrong word. It had been more like a low hum the squad had been carrying. I would learn later that it was the curse on the land, working through their negative emotions over generations, slowly tightening their tribal laws into shapes that fit the curse's purpose. I would learn that I had effectively cleaned a thought. The implications would worry me later when there was time to be worried. For now, the squad had laid down their weapons. They were asking very quietly about Peter and Flora. I brought them to the village. We walked in past the Dwarven workshops. The elves looked, with the faint surprise of a people who had not seen healthy dwarves in a long time, at the rows of forge fires and the smiths working in the open. We walked past the new fields, where Sonia stood up from her shovel and grinned wolfishly at them in a way that was friendly and deeply unsettling. We walked past my house, past Flora's clinic, up to the base of the great tree itself. The captain, who had introduced himself by then, but I am not going to put his name into a story that is not his, looked up at the canopy of the great tree the way you look up at something you have not been theologically prepared for. Idrasil came out of the trunk to meet us. She was wearing the green dress. She had made an effort with her hair, which I noticed because she did not normally make an effort with her hair. She floated, not stood, floated, to a height that suggested authority without being overtly aggressive about it. She told the elves, in a formal cadence I had heard her use exactly once before, that they were guests in her domain and that they would be treated as such. The captain dropped to his knees. The whole squad dropped to its knees. Elves' theology runs deep, where great spirits are concerned. The captain, kneeling, said the kind of words a man says when he has been preparing to make a polite apology and has instead been offered a small religious experience. Yggdrasil accepted it. She told them to rise. Luna, who had been waiting overhead, decided that this was the moment to land. She landed perhaps 30 yards from us, with the soft thud she had been practicing for not breaking the village. The captain saw her and seized his sword without quite meaning to. Old reflexes from a people who had grown up knowing what black dragons were and not knowing that white dragons were any different. I held up a hand. The captain stilled. Luna lowered her head until it was at my level. She pressed her forehead briefly against my shoulder and made the soft purring growl she made when she was claiming someone in front of strangers. She then shrank, over the course of perhaps 3 seconds, to the size of a large hound and walked over to the elf captain and inspected him in the way one inspects a carriage one is considering riding in. "This is Luna," I said, "and she is a friend." Mid-sentence apologies for the surprise. "And she will not eat you, probably." I added the probably for Sonia's benefit. Sonia, behind me, snorted. We toured the village. Dorado came out and exchanged the slow deferential greetings of a Dwarven chief who had once lived near elven settlements and had not seen them in many generations. The elves were shown the well, the workshops, the hot spring foundation that the dwarves were just starting to dig out, the orchard that Peter had been planning. They looked at all of it with the expressions of a people who had been told since childhood that the cursed forest was the place where green things stopped, and were now being shown a place where green things had decided to start over. The captain, near the end of the tour, drew me aside. He told me, with the formal precision of a man making a request, that he could speak to his elders about Peter and Flora, but that the council of his village would not, he believed, accept the reversal. The law was older than any one captain. He needed help. I told him I would come. The flight to the elf village was less than an hour. Luna landed on the village square with Flora, Peter, and me on her back. The square was full. A village council had been called for the captain's report, and the captain had reported, and the village, when given the news that Peter's curse had been removed, had decided that the law applied anyway. They were arguing about it when we arrived. The arguing stopped when Luna's shadow fell across the square. Luna did not breathe fire. Luna did not roar. Luna simply landed. I dismounted. Flora stayed close to my shoulder. Peter stayed close to Flora's. I looked across the square. I looked at the elders. I saw on every face the same low hum I had seen on the captain's squad. The The same accumulated film, the same long pressure of the curse working through generations of perfectly understandable negative feelings. They had made a law about people who carried the divine curse because for centuries, that had been the only protection their village had had. The law had been good once. The law had been calcified by a slow stain into something that no longer noticed when its target was a healed child. I did not give a speech. I have never given a speech. I lifted my hand and used purification. It went out across the square. It went past the elders. It went past the assembled villagers, close to 100 of them by my rough count. The pillars of soft light came up out of every body in the square at once, briefly and settled. The arguing stopped. People blinked. People looked at each other with the slowly clarifying expressions of people who had been carrying something they had not known they were carrying. A woman near the front of the crowd looked at Flora, looked properly. The recognition in her face was not the recognition of a stranger. She put a hand to her own mouth. Then she ran. Flora's mother got to her first. Flora's father a second behind. They wrapped both their children in arms that were already apologizing. The apology was the kind of apology that does not have words because the words are too small. Flora let them. Peter let them. The village stood around them and watched, and slowly began to make sounds, small ones, not cheers. The human quiet kind of sounds people make when something they have been bracing for has been replaced by something they were not prepared for. I stepped back. Luna stepped back with me. The captain stayed close to the family. I had time to be glad. I had time, even, to be slightly tired. Then Flora's mother saw me, separated herself from the embrace, and bowed to me. The whole village bowed with her. I let them. I would not have been able to stop them. I was not yet good enough at being who they were calling me to refuse the gesture and not insult them. The cleaner, I thought, had earned a third promotion, or a fourth. The arithmetic was getting complicated. We stayed for the meal. The village had insisted. Flora's mother had insisted. Peter's father had insisted. It would have been actively rude to leave, and I had no urgent reason to be elsewhere, and Luna had decided that the small stream behind the village was an interesting object she would like to have an opinion about. So we stayed. Peter ate 3 platefuls. Flora ate 1 and barely tasted it because her parents kept telling her things they had clearly been holding for 2 years and had not been able to say. After dinner, I walked along the stream behind the village to give the family some space. Flora caught up with me. She walked next to me for a while without saying anything. The water beside us was the kind of clear water you only got around elf villages, where the spring people had a hand in the way the rivers ran. The light was the soft gold that only happens at the end of a day that has been better than the day deserved. "Thank you," she said. "You've said that already." "I am saying it again." I did not have an answer to that one. I waited. She stopped walking. I stopped walking. She was looking at the stream. She started a sentence the way one starts a sentence when one has been preparing it for a long time and has finally decided that this was the moment to put it down. "Adrian, a bush behind us exploded. Sonia came out of it at speed, with her tail bristled to twice its size and her ears back, and she landed between Flora and me with an expression that could have been used to fight a small war. She had, I would learn later, been hiding behind the same bush since we had landed. She had ridden Luna here without telling anyone. She was, in her own words, very good at her job. "You," she announced, pointing at Flora with one finger and at me with another, "do not get to seduce my mate." Flora's color, which had been pink, went a different pink. I was not. "You were starting to. I have a sense for these things. You don't. My senses are excellent. I am a wolf." The air went out of whatever moment had been about to happen. Flora's shoulders dropped very slightly, and the smallest possible smile, the smile of someone who had been spared a sentence she had not, at the deepest level, been ready to finish, appeared and disappeared on her face. She looked at me. I looked at her. The moment was already gone. "Tomorrow," she said. "Or, whenever." "Whenever," I said. She nodded. She walked back toward her parents. Sonia stood between us until Flora was out of sight, then turned to me and demanded a piggyback ride home. I gave her one. The cleaner, I thought, was definitely not going to clarify the wife situation anytime soon. Some stains, it turned out, were not stains. Some were the scaffolding the rest of the building was sitting on. The dwarves struck a hot spring while digging the foundation for a second workshop. I had heard the report at breakfast, Dorado's oldest worker arriving wet, mud-streaked, and informing me with the resigned sigh of a man who had wasted half a day's effort. The water was too hot to cool steel. The dig was a loss. Could I please come and see, in case I could think of anything to do with it? I had run. 3 days later, the dwarves and I had a hot spring facility. The cave had been widened. The water had been channeled into a stone pool large enough for several people. A drainage ditch had been carved. Lanterns had been hung. There was, at the entrance, a small wooden changing room because the dwarves had taken one look at my plan and asked, with the patience of senior craftspeople correcting an enthusiastic apprentice, whether I had perhaps wanted dignity to be a feature. I had wanted dignity to be a feature. I just had not thought of it. I climbed into the pool with a towel and the kind of relief I had not felt in 2 lifetimes. The water was the right side of scalding. The lanterns were dim. The forest outside, through the wide cave mouth, was green and cleaner than it used to be. I let my head go back against the stone rim. I closed my eyes. I checked my status, because checking my status had become a private hobby of mine. The level had drifted up to 54. Most of my stats were rank D now. Spirit was rank S. Mental power was still rank A. The skill list had a new line at the bottom, where there had not been one before, that read only as a row of question marks. The job line, which had read Cleaning Master since I was 12, also read with question marks at the end of the title. A hand splashed water across my eyes. Idrasil, in a towel of her own, had decided to sit in the pool with me without giving notice. She informed me cheerfully that the question marks were a divine sign of an impending occupation change, the system reclassifying me because my actions had outgrown my original title. She told me, with the visible pleasure of a person delivering excellent news, that I had surpassed even the gods' expectations. She also told me she enjoyed the water and would be staying. I thanked her for the information and tried not to react to the rest. Sonia ran into the cave at full speed. She was wearing, to her credit, after a brief and decisive lecture from Flora at the entrance, a towel. She launched herself into the pool with the form of a wolf girl who had not been told that pools had walls. The wave went over the lanterns. I had to use cleaning twice in succession to repair the changing room. Sonia, I said, with the patient voice of a man trying very hard to maintain a system. You do not run in the bath. You do not jump in the bath. You pour water on yourself before you enter the bath. She looked at me with the wounded dignity of someone whose enthusiasm had been corrected. Sorry, I added. I yelled. You did, she said. But it is fine. You are the master of the bath. You can yell about the bath. Flora, behind her, came in slowly and properly with a wooden bucket, pouring water over her shoulders before stepping in. She wore her towel with the deliberate composure of a person who had thought through every variable of the social situation she was now in. She nodded once at Yggdrasil, with the polite acknowledgement of a quiet rival who had decided to be civilized about the venue. Yggdrasil nodded back. Sonia, between them, was already trying to teach the lanterns a song she had made up. I closed my eyes again and decided internally that the village was going to need a second hot spring as soon as possible. A month after the hot spring opened, I was going to lose my mind. The dwarves did their own washing now. The elves did their own washing. The hot spring had absorbed the village's bathing entirely. The pile of dirty work clothes that had been my daily project had stopped being a pile. I stood in the workshop where I had been doing laundry for months and looked at the empty baskets the way a man looks at the empty space in a house where a beloved object used to be. Yggdrasil, who had appeared next to me without my noticing, a habit she had developed since the contract, informed me that this was a good thing. It is not a good thing. You wished for a quiet life. You have a quiet life. I wished for a quiet life with cleaning, then dirty something. It does not work like that. She told me, with her small smile, that I was being ridiculous. She was probably right. I had not yet developed the maturity to admit when I was being ridiculous. The dwarves had, in my distraction, built her a shrine. It was small. It was stone. It was placed beside my house, at the visible center of the village, the spot where everyone walking past would see it. It had been the dwarves' idea. They had not asked permission. The shrine had simply appeared, in the way the dwarves did things they were certain about, and the elves had agreed with it the next morning, and Yggdrasil had pretended for one full afternoon that she was indifferent before sitting on the shrine's roof with her legs crossed and announcing she liked it. I told her she looked good there. She told me, formally, that I was a flatterer. That afternoon, an elf mother brought her daughter to the shrine for an occupation ceremony. Yggdrasil, in our region of the world, was the only being capable of channeling the divine oracle to a child outside a major city. She read the girl's occupation, seamstress. The girl received her skills. The mother thanked Yggdrasil and walked her daughter home with the careful pride of a woman who had just seen a good future open in front of her child. I watched it from a distance. The cleaner I had been, the cleaner the gods had named, the cleaner the dwarves had bowed to and named Lord. That cleaner had now built a place where other children were getting their occupations from spirits who had decided, by mutual agreement, to live with him. I had not consented to that, exactly. The world had not asked. Dorado came up to me as the elf mother left. He had a piece of folded parchment. He told me, with his usual delicacy of manner, that an outside merchant, a man from a guild that the elf settlement had once traded with, had sent word. The merchant had heard about the new village. He wanted to come, to see it, to talk. Talk, I said. About what? Trade, presumably. Resources. The kind of thing merchants talk about. I asked Dorado what he thought. Dorado looked at me, briefly. I think you should be the one in the room. Yggdrasil, behind me, agreed. I sighed. I was not going to win this one. The merchant arrived 4 days later. His name, when he gave it, with the careful little bow of a man who had been bowing professionally for most of his life, was Roland. He was the head of a guild called the Silk Company. He had a skill called Trade Route, which he explained in detail without quite being asked, that allowed him to open a teleportation link between any registered location and any other location he had previously visited. Luna had escorted him from a long way off, looping above the forest until she was certain his party was who they said they were. He had, to his credit, not wet himself when she landed in front of his caravan. He praised the village's hospitality. He admired the architecture. He complimented Flora, who was serving tea, in the precise voice of a man who had been complimenting waitstaff for a long time. He proposed a trade agreement. The terms were generous. Generous, in my experience of how the world worked, was the first sign of a sentence that was not finished. I let him say what he wanted to say. I waited. He took my silence for an opening to deepen the offer. Dorado, beside me, looked enthusiastic. Flora, in the corner with the teapot, looked at me with an expression I had come to recognize as her something is off look. I said, Mr. Roland, Lord Adrian, just Adrian, we still have things we have not heard before forming this agreement. Of course, what do you actually want? He was quiet for the first time since he had walked in. I gave him the long, polite second. He found the second uncomfortable. He glanced briefly at his aide, a man who had been taking very thorough notes. I had been hoping, he said, to develop a working relationship over time. You had been hoping to monopolize the resources of this forest by anchoring your guild to the safety of this village. You walked in here intending to offer enough to keep us comfortable while you turned the forest into a Silk Company territory. That is not an unreasonable plan in the abstract. It is just not a plan I was going to sign. The aide stopped writing. Roland, after a pause that I would learn was the rarest event in his professional life, laughed. It was a quiet laugh, with a great deal of acknowledgement in it. He told me, in the voice of a man who had decided to drop a costume he had been wearing for a long meeting, that he had badly underestimated the village, that he had walked in expecting a hermit and a few dwarves, that he was now revising several plans. What would, I said, an honest version of this conversation look like? He told me. The honest version was simpler. The honest version cut several layers of his original offer and left the parts that benefited both of us. Dorado pulled out a parchment we had prepared in advance with the village's actual demands. We negotiated across 4 meetings, held in that same room across the next several days, with Flora's tea and the occasional eruption of Sonia at the door demanding to know whether the deal involved her. We hammered out something that neither of us regretted. He was not getting the monopoly. He was getting something better, which was access and partnership, and the slow trust of being the merchant the village had decided to trust. After the final meeting, he asked if he could try the hot spring. I said yes. The trade route skill required a name. Roland told me this, soaking with a towel on his head, in the second outdoor bath the dwarves had built, outside this time, surrounded by trees, with stones around the pool. He needed to register the village's name into the magic circle his men were preparing in the trade post. The circle would teleport people and goods between his guild's hub city and the village. The name was what the spell would address. He needed it before he left. He told me, in the same conversation, that the world outside had grown complicated lately, that the kingdoms were nervous about something they could feel but could not see, that a merchant had a rule. He said it slowly, in the voice of a man quoting his own grandfather, that greed ruined a man. I appreciated the rule. I told him I would have the name by morning. That evening, I asked the village. The dwarves, predictably, suggested Adrian Village. I said no. The elves, who had recently arrived as permanent residents, said they were too new to have an opinion and would defer. Sonia suggested, with the bright certainty of a girl who had thought about this for a single second, that we should call it Adriaonia after the two of us. I told her no. Peter, beaming, suggested we call it the Cozy Relax Village. I appreciated the suggestion. I declined the suggestion. Flora, very quietly, said, Adrian Village? No, I thought not. The answer, when it arrived, was Yggdrasil. The tree was the village's spine. The spirit who lived in the tree was the village's heart. The name belonged to the place, and the place belonged to her. And naming it after her was the only suggestion that did not require renaming the thing the village actually was. I asked her at the great tree the next morning if she would accept her name being the village's name. She told me, with the formality she used for state matters, that this was a lazy choice, that I had merely run out of other options, that the dwarves should have suggested something more original, that she was not, technically, asking for this kind of formal recognition. She told me, 10 seconds later, that she liked it. Then she came down off her branch and floated up into the canopy with both arms open and made a small spinning movement that was not quite a dance, and called the canopy to bend toward her in a way the canopy had never bent before, and announced, formally, that the place was now Yggdrasil Village. I would learn, much later, from Yggdrasil herself, in a moment when she was being more honest than usual, that inside the great tree, at the precise moment the name was registered into Roland's magic circle, the divine right scepter pulsed with a soft, warm light. It was not a thing she told me at the time. She was not yet sure whether the pulse meant what she suspected it meant. She did not want me, she said, to be discouraged. I learned about it later. For now, the name was registered. Roland left with his caravan through a magic circle that worked the first time. The trade post stood. The village had a name on a map. The cleaner had an address, finally. The trade route had transformed Yggdrasil Village into something I no longer recognized. The first frost was on the new fields. The first child of the village had been born 3 weeks earlier, a Dwarven boy named after Dorado and me, with the unfortunate but affectionate compound that the dwarves had decided was funny enough to make formal. The hot spring was loud at all hours. The trade post was managing 4 shipments a week. Sonia had received an occupation ceremony from Yggdrasil and emerged classified as a battle maniac, which had not surprised anyone in the village. I was in the village square that afternoon, trying to teach Yggdrasil why a green cardigan she had ordered through Roland's network looked good on her when Luna landed. Luna landed gently. She was carrying something. The something was a man, slung between her front claws and held the way one holds a wounded animal one is concerned about. Not pinned, not eaten, supported. She set him down on the moss in front of me and made a soft, proud sound. I looked at the man. The man was wearing the remnants of a fine coat that I recognized from very far away, maroon, silver thread. The cut had been the cut of the upper court of the Arclight Kingdom 3 years ago, and looking at it now, frayed, mud-streaked, blood darkened along one sleeve, I felt the strange disorientation of a person who had not seen someone from his old life in such a long time that the old life no longer felt entirely real. His glasses were broken. His face was very pale. He was breathing. Yggdrasil, behind me, asked who he was. I told her. The finance minister of the Arclight Kingdom. I had seen him in the throne room when I was younger. I had seen him sign documents at my father's hand. He had not, as far as I could remember, ever spoken to me directly. Flora was already running toward us with her healing satchel. Luna lowered her head close to mine and growled the explanation she had brought him for. She had found him collapsed in the forest, days into the cursed sections, dying. She had carried him back without dropping him. I told her she had done well. Flora knelt next to the man and used healing on his ribs and his shoulder and the cut along the inside of his forearm. The skin closed. Color returned to him in slow stages. His eyes opened sometime in the late afternoon into the soft golden light of the village he had nearly died trying to find. He looked at the great tree above us. He looked at me. He said, in a voice that did not entirely have a body to push it, that he had not expected the afterlife to look like this. "You're not in the afterlife." He blinked at me. "You're in Yggdrasil Village. I'm Adrian. Hello, Robert." He made a sound that was the start of crying and the start of laughing simultaneously, and was not sure which one to commit to. The conversation could wait. I had Flora's people make him a bed. That evening, after the welcome party, which Robert had stood through in his cleaned coat with the careful dignity of a man wearing a uniform he had thought he had lost, I sat with him by the fire alone. He had been exiled, he told me, 3 months earlier. The numbers had not added up in the kingdom's books. The military budget was inflating. Taxes on the marginal duchies had reached a level that was already producing famines. He had submitted a report. He had submitted a second report when the first was ignored. The third time, he had presented his case directly to the king. The king had charged him with the same legal pretext that had been used on me 3 years before: treason, forest exile. The mages had teleported him into the same part of the cursed forest I had been left in. He had been alive in the forest for 2 months. He had been walking in a direction he could not entirely identify because something in him had refused to lie down and die. Luna had found him eventually. I asked the question I had to ask. He did not answer for a moment. Then he answered. His wife's name was Anna. His daughter's name was Sarah. They had lived, in the castle's ministerial quarters. The day he had been arrested, he had been taken from his office. He had not seen them since. He had no way of knowing whether they had been allowed to remain in the castle or evicted, or worse. He had not asked the village for help finding them, he said, with the painful precision of a man explaining a code he had been keeping with himself because he had refused to repay the people who had saved him with the impossible request of saving more. He was holding his hands together, tightly, the way a man holds his own hands when he has decided not to let them shake. I let him finish. Then I said quietly, "I will find them." He looked at me. "I have a way. I have a merchant. I have a network. They will not be easy to locate, but they will be findable, and I am going to find them. You don't have to ask. I'm telling you." The hands he had been holding tight came apart. He covered his face. He did not say anything for a long minute. The fire popped softly. The wind moved against the small window. When he was ready to speak again, he said only "thank you," in a voice that was a different voice than the one he had used at the welcome party. I told him he could speak about it whenever he wanted to. He could also not speak about it. He did not speak about it. I left him by the fire. Outside, the village was lit up for the autumn evening. I went to find Roland. Roland was at the trade post the next morning, doing what he did best, which was paperwork. I gave him a parchment. The parchment had everything I knew: Anna Manament, Sarah Manament, the castle ministerial quarters, the date Robert had been taken, the kingdom's typical procedure for removing exiled families. Roland read it without expression. His aide stood quietly behind him with the leather notebook, taking notes that were not for any record I would ever see. "You want my network to find them?" "I do. In the kingdom that exiled you." "Yes." He read the parchment a second time. He set it down. "What are you offering?" I told him I would pay any price he named. He asked me, without inflection, to consider what I was actually offering. I considered. I said I did not want a transactional answer. I trusted him. Precisely because of that, I did not want to be in his debt. Whatever he named, I was prepared to pay. He smiled, very small, the way a man smiles when a person has accidentally said the right sentence at the right moment. "Then I would prefer," he said, "an open favor, to be cashed in the future, at my discretion. Not money, not goods, a favor. From you specifically, for something only you can do. You don't know what you'll need. I know enough." I considered it for the length of one breath. Then I agreed. He sent runners that afternoon, through his guild's network, through the cities his trade route connected to, through agents who specialized in finding people who had reason to be hidden. He did not tell me how many. He told me that, given the kingdom's current temperament, the search would take a week, perhaps 2. He told me, in the same level voice, that the favor he would eventually request would not, when the day came, be unreasonable. I trusted him on that. I had no choice but to trust him on that. The math of trust in this part of my life had shifted in ways I had not yet fully sorted out. 8 days later, the trade circle activated. Roland's people had moved fast. Anna and Sarah Manament had been evicted from the castle quarters 2 weeks after Robert's exile, exactly as he had feared, and had gone into hiding with a distant cousin in the capital's lower district. The cousin had nearly turned them out a week earlier. Roland's agents had reached them just in time, identified themselves as guild staff, given them papers, walked them to the trade circle's hub city, and put them through. Robert had been at the trade post since dawn. The magic circle's light flared. The shape of 2 people resolved out of it. A woman in a worn traveling cloak with the careful posture of a senior household manager. A girl, perhaps 9 years old, holding her mother's hand. They blinked into the autumn sunlight. They saw Robert. There is a kind of moment that does not need narration. The mother dropped the bag she was carrying. The girl let out a sound. Robert did not move because moving would have broken him. Then he moved anyway and was across the trade post and had his daughter in his arms before either of them had the time to brace for it. His wife followed. They held each other for a length of time, during which the entire village, having gathered, very quietly arranged itself around the trade post and decided not to say anything at all. I watched from the back. Yggdrasil watched from beside me. Luna had landed on the perimeter and folded her wings. Sonia was chewing the cuff of her own sleeve in a way she did when she had to hold a feeling she did not have a word for. Even Dorado, who ordinarily dealt with emotional matters by leaving the room, was standing in the door of the trade post with his hammer in his belt and his hat in his hand. After a long minute, Robert looked up at me. His eyes were the eyes of a man who had been carrying something he had finally been allowed to set down. He did not say anything. He did not need to. I went to clean something. Roland came to me a week after the reunion with what looked, from a distance, like a problem. It was a wagon, a large wagon, full of goods, dirty goods, used clothing in mixed conditions, bolts of stained silk, ceramic dishes with cooking grime sealed into them, fur-lined coats that had been packed wet at some point in the past and had then been sold 3 times by traders who had not wanted to deal with them. The kind of inventory most merchants threw out. Roland walked through them with the expression of a man considering an experiment. He asked me, with the polite professional cadence I had come to enjoy from him, whether I would consider applying my skill to the lot. I cast cleaning 10 times. Each pass took dust and grime and old oil and salt and dried sweat off the goods. The bolts of silk went pristine. The ceramic dishes went the white they had been when fired. The coats went soft and supple, the fur shining as if a furrier had spent a week on them. Roland walked the wagon a second time. He picked up a coat. He held it up to the light. He turned to me with the expression of a man whose entire next quarter of business had just changed shape. He proposed a brand, goods personally restored by Lord Adrian of Yggdrasil village. He could buy used inventory cheap, run it through me, sell it at premium. He would pay the village a percentage. The percentage he named was generous in a way that suggested he had been thinking about this for some time. I said yes immediately. Flora, who had walked in halfway through the conversation, made a small sound that I recognized as the sound she made when I was being too eager. Adrian, she said, the way a sister says a brother's name when she is not entirely sure if he understands what he is agreeing to. It is fine. I want to clean things. Roland wants to sell things. The village wants to eat. The math is good. Roland, behind me, was already drafting clauses. Sonia chose this moment to come in from the field with mud up to her elbows, look at the pile of goods, and announce that she was going to find more people for me to rescue, since rescuing people seemed to make me happy. I told her, with a great deal of patience, that catching people was not the same as rescuing them. She told me she would be careful. I asked her to please be very careful. She agreed in a way that did not entirely commit her. Luna, on the roof of the workshop, made a sound I had decided was her laugh. The cleaner had a brand now. The cleaner had a wife by acclamation. The cleaner had a finance minister, a divine dragon, a great spirit, an elf healer, an elf cook, a beastkin protector, and a dwarven workshop. And all of them were operating this autumn afternoon on the same village green. Somewhere in the Arclight Kingdom, my father had decided to invade. I would not know about that for 2 more weeks. The autumn was mine, and I was going to spend the autumn cleaning. The autumn deepened. The first frost gave way to the first solid cold. The village was thriving in a way that had begun to demand structure I had not asked for and could not avoid. Robert had built me a list. He delivered it with the care of a man who had been waiting for the right week to put it down. The village had grown past communal property. Too many people now, too many trades, too many resources, and needed a transition. Private holdings, taxation, a council, a small body of laws drawn up by Carnell, the former noble who had specialized in territorial law. All of it folded into a structure that any reasonable continent recognized as a state. Robert presented this to me at my own kitchen table. Dorado was there. Yggdrasil was there. Several former nobles I had not yet learned all the names of were there. They had clearly rehearsed. You are asking me, I said, to formally rule. We are asking you to formalize what you already do. I do laundry. You also have a great spirit, a divine dragon, a state-recognized trade route, 100 dwarves, a tribe of allied elves, and a regular line of refugees walking out of the cursed forest looking for shelter. The laundry, Lord Adrian, is not the only thing you do. I let him say his piece. I asked Dorado what the dwarves thought. Dorado said, with the small smile of a man who was enjoying every minute of this, that the dwarves had voted yesterday and were unanimous. I asked Yggdrasil what she thought. Yggdrasil said, in the tone she used when she was being formal, that the village was already what they were proposing to make it formal as. The only thing missing was the word. I agreed. I did not have a way out of agreeing that did not involve refusing the well-being of every person at the table. I told them I would consider the title later. I did agree to the property reform. I did agree to Carnell's laws. I did agree to the council. What I did not know that night was that several hundred miles east of us, in a kingdom I no longer thought of as mine, my brother had just stood in front of an army assembled at the cursed forest's eastern edge. The army was afraid of the forest. They had every reason to be. Byron had used authority domination on them. Their fear had stopped existing. Their loyalty was no longer their own. They marched into the cursed forest the next morning with the steady tread of people who had been told a story and were no longer free to question the story. I would learn about Byron's army roughly the same week the army learned about me. I was outside the safe zone the morning the kingdom found me. I had been pushing the perimeter steadily for 2 months, purifying small sections, letting Yggdrasil's blessing extend, then resting for a day or two before doing it again. It was slow. It was sustainable. It was, in the long arithmetic of the curse, finally working. 5% had become 12, 12 had become 20, in slow, careful pieces. The cursed forest was no longer the cursed forest in a small, expanding circle around the village. It was, near my edge, just forest. That morning, I had cleansed a section of woodland where a spring fed an old stone bowl pond. I had collapsed onto the moss to recover. Flora had used healing on the strain in my head. Yggdrasil had been hovering above me with a faint smile that meant she was pleased about something I had not yet noticed. She told me, abruptly, that men were coming, east, within the hour. She was not certain about the number. The number was many. I stood up. I looked east. The forest there was still cursed, still dark. The pressure of the wrongness pushed against my spirit eye like a held breath. But the men coming through it were not themselves monsters. They were under something, the same kind of something that had been on the elf squad, a film, an order they had not chosen. I had time, before they reached me, to wonder how my father had finally decided to send them. I had time to wonder if I should pretend not to be the person they were looking for. I had time to dismiss that idea. The choice was already made by them the moment they had crossed the line. I walked east, alone, toward the edge of the cursed forest's last unpurified mile, to meet them. I did not know, would not know for several days, that in the throne room of the Arclight Kingdom, my father had been watching the soldiers march through a skill called Vision of Subjects. The skill rode their loyalty. It allowed him to see what they saw. He had been watching their progress with the bored impatience of a man waiting for a forest to kill them. He was watching the moment I stepped into their column. He saw my face. He saw me alive. He saw, in the next second, the soldier's vision go white as I cast Purification. Then the feed cut. There were a lot of them. The column came around a bend in the path, and I stopped them with the simple expedient of being where they were marching. Their formation was not a soldier's formation. It was the marching shape of men whose feet had been told to go forward and were not allowed to ask why. Authority domination made physical. They had been on the road for 2 weeks. Their armor was filthy. Their boots were ragged. None of that, I noticed, had registered for them. Domination had stripped the discomfort along with the fear, and the bodies had paid for it without telling them. The captain at the front raised a hand. The column halted in unison. They looked at me with the dead-eyed certainty of people who had been told, in a voice that had bypassed their reason entirely, that the cursed forest contained one outlaw they were here to apprehend. Their swords were drawn before I had finished walking. A few of them, the ones at the front, recognized me. The recognition was visible the way a window glare is visible. Surface only, no person behind it. Domination did not allow them to be surprised. They were going to attack me anyway. They had been told to. I cast Purification. The wave went over the front rank. The black film that had been riding their loyalty came off them in a single soft exhalation, like a cloak too heavy to wear. The captain blinked. He looked at his hand, holding his sword. The way a man looks at his hand when he does not entirely remember why it had been told to do something. The men behind him began to slump as the wave reached them. Exhaustion they had not been allowed to feel. Confusion they had not been allowed to register. The smell of 2 weeks of unbathed marching, which they were also feeling for the first time. I cast Purification again and again. The column was deep. I worked outward, methodically, the way a man works through a wagon load of dirty silk, because the principle was the same. Some of the soldiers fell to their knees as the wave reached them. Some sat down where they stood. One of them dropped his sword and used the freed hand to cover his eyes, in the wordless way men do when they have been spared something they had not known they were going to be killed by. Yggdrasil and Flora caught up to me halfway through. Yggdrasil extended her spirit's blessing to wrap the freed soldiers in the protective barrier. Flora, behind us, started using healing on the worst of them, men whose bodies had been pushed past breakage by domination's removal of pain. Their bones, in some cases, had been walking on cracks. The healing put the cracks back together, while the men sat in the dirt and tried to remember their own names. Luna landed at the back of the column and began ferrying the wounded toward the village 2 at a time. because Luna, when given a job, did the job. The captain, when he had recovered enough to speak, asked me, in the dazed voice of a man asking the only question that mattered, where he was. "You're going to be fed," I said, "and then you're going home. The village will not keep you against your will. We will explain what happened on the way." He did not understand. I did not blame him. I told him to follow Luna. He nodded slowly, the way a man nods who is willing to take instructions from anyone willing to give them, because his last set of instructions had been bypassing his reason for 2 weeks. When the column was done, close to 200 men freed and walking in slow groups toward the village, I sat on the moss for a moment because the work had been more than I had expected. The spirit eye showed the path west of us, no longer carrying the sludge it had been carrying. At least for the column we had cleansed. Yggdrasil sat next to me without saying anything. "We are not going to get to keep this hidden," I said. She told me, quietly, that we had not been keeping it hidden for some time. 2 nights later, Hawk, Luna, in her smaller form, asleep on my pillow, raised her head and growled at the door. Someone had walked into Yggdrasil village without coming through the trade circle. Someone the Dwarven sentries had not stopped, because the Dwarven sentries had clearly been told not to stop them. I opened the door. 2 figures were kneeling on the moss outside my house. Pure white robes, gold embroidery at the hems. The emblem on the chest of each robe was an emblem I had only ever seen in books. The seal of the Holy Celestia Theocracy. They had walked there from somewhere I could not guess, in robes that should not have made it through the cursed forest, and they were kneeling in front of my house at the kind of hour that meant the message they had brought could not wait. The first envoy spoke. The voice was gentle and old, in a way that did not entirely match either body. He told me, with the careful formality of a church envoy delivering an official position, that the Spirit King, the head of his faith, the highest religious authority on the continent, had sent them. That the church had been monitoring my work in the cursed forest since the day I had purified the great tree. That every act since then, Yggdrasil, Luna, the village, the forest sections, the elf reconciliation, had been visible to them through their order's prophets. He told me that the Holy Celestia Theocracy formally and unconditionally supported anything I chose to do in this land. I asked him, quietly, what that meant. He told me that it meant exactly what he had said, that this place was, in their theology, a second sanctuary on the continent. That I was, in their theology, what they had been waiting for. The first sanctuary, he said, was the Holy City, the seat of their faith, founded centuries ago by their first prophet on a site of similar spiritual purification. The doctrine had always allowed for a second. They had been waiting, in the prayers of their order, for a long time. The purification of the great tree had been the sign. The contract with Yggdrasil had been the confirmation. The healing of the elf village had been, in their theological reading, the moment they had been certain. They were not asking for an alliance, they were declaring one. I thought about that for a moment. Yggdrasil, who had floated up next to me in her thinnest manifested form, watched the conversation without interrupting. If I declared this land an independent nation, I said, would the church recognize it? The envoy looked at me, then bowed. He said yes. I asked when they would be willing to do that publicly. He said, whenever Lord Adrian gives the word. I thanked him. I asked him to wait until the kingdom's army arrived in person. He understood. He told me that the formal documents were already prepared. They had been prepared, he said quietly, for some time. I went back inside. I did not sleep. The next morning, Yggdrasil carried me to the canopy. I could not climb the great tree on my own. Its trunk was too wide, its first branch too high. She set me down on a wide bough that overlooked the village and, beyond the village, the eastern forest. From there, I could see the roads. From there, I could see, with the spirit eye, the slow approach of a darker shape moving westward through the not yet purified miles. The army was the main one this time. The first column had been a probe. The second column, with my father at its head, was a full expedition force. Several thousand soldiers, mage handlers, supply wagons, banners. It would arrive in 3 days. I sat next to Yggdrasil on the branch for a long, quiet time. Below us, the village was waking up. The smiths starting fires, Peter at the kitchen, Sonia running across the central square at speed for reasons I did not feel up to investigating. Robert was already at the trade post. Flora had her clinic set up. Roland's people were unloading a shipment. They are coming for me, I said. They are coming because they have to. Your father cannot leave the question of you unanswered. He has too much to lose if he does. And the church will recognize the village the moment we decide. Yes, I thought about that. The cleaner, after 15 years of being told he was nothing, had a continent's most powerful religious body waiting on his word to call him a king. The math of the next 3 days had become very simple, even if the courage was a different thing entirely. Yggdrasil, I said, I think we are about to have to make a decision. She put her hand on my shoulder. I know. We sat there until the sun cleared the canopy. The army moved closer. The village, beneath us, did not yet know. I would tell them tonight. I had a speech to plan, of a kind I had never given. I was a cleaner. I was not by training or by inclination a man who declared things, but the world had been declaring things at me for 15 years, and almost none of those declarations had been with my consent, and the math of the next 3 days had given me, finally, the floor. The divine right scepter was inside the great tree, where it had been since the dwarves had carried it home. It would, I suspected, want to be present for the conversation I was about to have. The scepter and I had not yet had a serious conversation about my unwillingness to be a king. We were going to need to. I climbed down. Yggdrasil floated me down beside her. I went to find Robert. The kingdom's army arrived at noon. I had told the village the night before. Robert had organized the response. By morning, every villager who could stand had taken position in the central square, not as soldiers, because we were not soldiers, but as witnesses. The dwarves at the front, the elves behind, the former nobles in their old colors, Flora and Peter and Sonia at my left, Yggdrasil at my right, standing on the lowest bough of the great tree with her hands quiet at her sides. The army came up the eastern road through the trade route gate the dwarves had built, because that was the only road wide enough for a full column. The vanguard halted at the village line. The column behind it kept coming until it had stretched halfway down the road and could not move further without spilling into the houses. My brother walked through the front rank. He was older than the last time I had seen him, 18 now by my arithmetic, in the polished armor of the Conqueror's office, with a sword at his hip, and the kind of expression a man wears when he has been told all his life that he is a particular thing and has finally arrived at the place where he intends to demonstrate it. The boy who had stained my robe with ink to torment a maid had grown into a man who had stained an entire army's free will and called it strategy. He saw me. He did not pretend he had not. For a moment, watching the recognition register on his face, I felt something I had not expected to feel. Not satisfaction exactly, more like the small flat clarity of a sentence being completed. The brother who had announced his Conqueror occupation at 13, the brother who had watched me bound and teleported, was now looking at me alive, well-dressed, and standing on land that was, by any measurement available to him, mine. Brother, he said, with the particular smile I had not missed, you have been busy. I did not return the smile. He delivered, with a little theater for the soldiers' benefit, the kingdom's pronouncement. This land was unclaimed cursed forest, claimed by Arclight as of today. The villagers were directed to submit to kingdom authority. Failure to submit would be punished as treason. The villagers, behind me, did not move. Dorado stepped forward. He had his hammer in his belt, and the polite, firm look of a chief who had, in his life, dealt with several invaders, and was now dealing with one more. He told my brother, in his rustic dialect, with no honorifics, that the village had been built by Lord Adrian when there had been no one else here, that the dwarves had come of their own choosing, that the soldiers in front of him were welcome to leave the way they had come. The dwarves behind him said yes in unison. Byron's smile thinned. He told the dwarves they had misunderstood the situation. He explained, in the patient voice he used for inferiors, that submission was not a request. Then he stepped further into the square. Then he raised his hand. He activated authority domination. The skill was visible to my spirit eye. It rolled outward from him in a dark wave, the same sludge I had seen on the soldiers, scaled up to crowd size, reaching for every mind in the square the way a strong tide reaches for objects on a beach. It was supposed to find purchase in the existing fear and reverence the villagers carried for any authority figure, and twist that reverence toward Byron. It found nothing. The wave broke against the front rank of dwarves and dispersed. There was nothing in the dwarves' minds for it to redirect. No fear of him, because they had Yggdrasil's barrier and a divine dragon and the safest village on the continent. No reverence to repurpose, because every gram of reverence in the village had already been given, freely and over years, to the man standing next to me. The wave pushed harder. Byron raised his other hand. The sludge intensified. It rolled across the elves, the former nobles, Sonia, Flora, Peter. It found nothing in any of them. It came back to its source weakened and confused, like water trying to flow uphill. The villagers, in unison, looked at me. They did not look at me as a question. They looked at me to demonstrate to my brother where the answer was. Byron's skill faltered. He activated it again with a snarl. Yggdrasil, beside me, made a small dry sound that I would learn afterward was a laugh. "It is useless," she said, loud enough for the whole square. "While Adrian is here, your skill cannot work." The kingdom soldiers, behind Byron, were exchanging glances. Domination had been holding them on the road for 2 weeks, and the fact that it was failing here was something even their dulled minds were beginning to register. One of them, in the middle ranks, lowered his sword without quite knowing why. Another. Byron looked at his own hand. His face went the white that anger goes after pride has been removed from underneath it. He looked at me. "How?" he said, in the slow voice of a man asking a question whose answer he could not afford to hear. "Could I be inferior to a laundryman?" I did not answer. The answer was in the square around him. I stepped forward. I had not until that moment known I was going to declare. I had thought I was going to negotiate. I had thought I was going to refuse the kingdom's claim and offer some kind of treaty. The decision, in the end, made itself the way most of my decisions did, by being the only sentence available to me when the moment came. "This land," I said, "is not Arc-like kingdoms. It never was. It was the cursed forest, unclaimed, until Yggdrasil and I built something here that no one else was willing to build. The people you see in this square are mine. The land you are standing on is mine. As of this moment, this is the nation I rule." I had not meant the word mine the way a king means it. I had meant it the way a man means it when he has spent 15 years being told he was nothing, and the people he had cleaned for had decided otherwise. The mine was theirs to give. They had given it. I was, finally, willing to accept the gift. The great tree shuddered, not a small shudder, a long one, from the roots up. The same kind of shudder a person makes when they have been waiting, in silence, for a decision to be spoken out loud, and the decision has finally been spoken. A column of white light went up from its crown into the sky, and held there, the way the pillar I had made in Phase 5 had held there, but cleaner, brighter, with intention. Out of the column, an object descended. The divine right scepter, which had been inside the tree since the day the dwarves had brought it to Yggdrasil village, came down through the air on its own. The metal was the same metal it had always been. The leaf shapes at its head were the same. What was different was the weight of intention I could feel rolling off it as it crossed the air toward me. It came to my hand. It settled into my palm with the soft, quiet click of something arriving at a destination it had been moving toward. Slowly, since the day I had first touched it in a dwarven hut several months earlier. The metal was warm. The leaves at the head of it caught the afternoon light and refracted it into something that was not the afternoon light. The weight was the weight of an object that had been waiting for the right hand and had decided, finally, that the right hand was the one currently holding it. The villagers were quiet. The kingdom soldiers were quieter. Yggdrasil, beside me, said, in a voice loud enough for the square, but low enough to be a personal acknowledgement, "Welcome, Lord Adrian." She had never called me that before. She would, going forward, never not call me that, though she would say it with varying amounts of sincerity, depending on the moment. Byron stared at the scepter. His face did the thing faces do when they have understood something all at once that they were not prepared to understand. The divine right scepter was not a fairy tale to him. He had read about it in his court histories. He knew what it meant when a divine relic of that rank chose a holder. He knew, in the part of him that had been trained as a prince before he had been corrupted, that the scepter's choice was not something he could argue with. He drew his sword anyway. He did not aim at me. He aimed at the front rank, the dwarves, the elves, the closest civilian he could reach, because killing them was the only consequence he could now create that would force me to react. He moved fast. He had had Conqueror training. He had 2 yards of unobstructed ground between his blade and a dwarven smith named Holm, who had been watching with the kind of tired patience an old smith watches a young soldier with. Sonia got there first. I did not see her move. I have, in retrospect, watched the moment again in my head, and I still do not see her move. Byron's blade was on its way to Holm, and then Sonia was between them, and the blade was in Sonia's shoulder, and her right hand was around Byron's wrist with the kind of grip that did not allow the wrist to do anything else. She did not fall. She did not even take a step backward. She looked at Byron the way a wolf looks at a thing that has bitten her, and she threw him. He went 6 meters through the air. He hit the ground rolling. The sword stayed in her shoulder. Blood ran down her sleeve onto the cobble in a thin, steady line. She did not look at the wound. She looked at me, and her tail was still up, and she was still, somehow, against the laws of beastkin physiology and the laws of common sense. Grinning. "Master," she said, "the rude one is still breathing. He stays breathing. Boring." Flora was at her side before the blade had finished tearing fabric. Flora's healing came on with the soft, warm light it always came on with. Sonia, breathing through clenched teeth, looked at me with an expression I did not know she had. Not pain, not anger, just attention. She wanted to know what I wanted her to do next. I told her to stay still. I raised the scepter toward Byron. I cast Purification. Not on Byron, on his skill. The scepter changed the quality of the cast. Every purification I had done before had been an exorcism on a body or a place. The scepter let me target a specific active skill effect, separate from the person using it with the precision of a needle. Authority domination came off Byron the way a coat comes off a shoulder. The dark sludge that had been animating the skill broke apart in midair and dissolved. Byron screamed. The scream was not pain at the body level. The scream was the recoil of a skill that had been the spine of his identity since the day he had received it 3 years ago, being severed cleanly from the network it was attached to. His name, as I would learn from Yggdrasil afterward, briefly read as authority instead of authority domination. The corruption gone, the title left as the corrupted thing's vestigial bone. Then he collapsed. His hand opened. His sword stayed where Sonia had left it. Behind him, the kingdom soldiers blinked. 200 of them, who had been holding the road for 2 weeks, came out from under their controller's web at the same time. The transition was visible. The dark wash on their bodies thinned and then dispersed. The men in the front ranks looked at the soldiers in the back ranks. The soldiers in the back ranks looked at one another. Several of them sat down where they stood. One of them, a young one, with a mother somewhere in the kingdom, began to cry without making a sound. I stepped forward to address them. I did not need to be loud. "You are no longer under your prince's skill. You are not my prisoners. You will be fed. You will be cared for. When you are ready, you may return home. Or you may stay here and be people instead of soldiers for as long as you would like. The choice is yours. The village will not punish you for being delivered against your will." The captain of the front rank sank to one knee. Several others followed. Most of them stayed standing, exhausted, uncertain. Some of them began to laugh. The strange wet laugh men do when they have been freed from something they had not known was holding them. Yggdrasil looked at me. She did not say anything. She did not need to. "There is more of them in the forest," I said. "Several thousand. He cannot have brought all of them here." "East," she said. "East." Luna had been waiting. She landed in the square the moment I called. She was already at full size. Yggdrasil and I climbed onto her back. She lifted off through the column of light still rising from the great tree as if the column had been put up for her. We banked east. The cursed forest from above was still partially cursed. The eastern third was still dark. The army was moving through it in a long broken column. The second wave my father had sent, several thousand strong, marching west under domination effects, sustained by Byron's lieutenants on the ground. They were 1 day's march from the village. I held the scepter forward into the wind. The scepter responded with the bird's eye sense it had given me when I had first held it in the square. I could feel the territory beneath us, every square mile of it, the curse patches like ink on a map I was holding open in my mind. I could see, within that territory, every soldier under domination. Hundreds, thousands of pinpricks of dark sludge moving as a single body westward. "Sweep," Yggdrasil said, behind me. I cast Purification. The skill rolled out from the scepter in a wide arc that had nothing to do with my immediate vision and everything to do with the scepter's territorial perception. Wave 1 took the front quarter of the column. The dark pinpricks below us went white and then went out. Wave 2 took the second quarter. The lieutenants, who had been carrying small sub-pieces of domination, broke as their anchor. Byron, still unconscious in the village square, was no longer feeding the network. Wave 3, Wave 4. The column was unraveling underneath us. Luna held the air smoothly. We made one long pass east, then turned and came back at lower altitude. I cast again and again. The work was the same kind of work I had done in the column the week before. Methodical, paced. Only this time I was doing it from the air, on a scale the scepter had unlocked. It took 2 hours. The forest below us, when we landed at a clearing for me to rest for 10 minutes, was full of men sitting on the ground in groups of 3 and 4, blinking at the sky. The domination had been holding their bodies up the way a coat hanger holds up a coat. With the domination gone, several of them simply fell over. Most of them did not. They sat, they breathed. Several of them wept. One man, in a noble's tabard, walked over to the wreckage of a supply cart and sat down on it with his face in his hands, and did not move for a long time. None of them attacked me. None of them appeared, frankly, capable of attacking me. The captains, when I called them together, asked me what I wanted them to do. Walk back to the kingdom border. Tell my father what happened. Tell him exactly. He needs to hear it from your mouths. They did not argue. They were too tired to argue. We took off again. The sun was dropping. We banked west, back toward the village, back toward Sonia, who would have a stitched shoulder and a wide grin by the time we landed. The divine right scepter in my hand was still warm. The cleaner had a kingdom now. The cleaner had not asked for a kingdom. The cleaner had a brother in chains in the village square, an army being told to walk home, a great spirit who had just officially called him Lord Adrian, a wolf-eared mate who had taken a sword for him in front of every person in his life, and an ancient divine relic that had decided he was the right answer to a question someone had asked centuries before he had been born. Tomorrow, I would deal with my father. Tonight, I needed to make sure Sonia ate something hot. I had not been in this throne room in 3 years. The dragon decided where to land before I did. Luna had carried Yggdrasil and me from Yggdrasil village in less than 4 hours, a flight that should have taken a week on the ground, that she had completed without strain, with the offhand competence of a divine being doing a small errand. As we approached the capital, I had asked her to land in the courtyard like a polite guest. She had ignored me. She had banked once around the palace, identified the throne room window, and gone for the window. The window was the largest stained glass window I had grown up under. It was old enough to be in the kingdom's official heraldry. It would, if I was unlucky, go down in the kingdom's official heraldry as the window the divine dragon had broken. She did not break it gently. The roar she gave was not the roar she used in the forest. It was the roar she used when she wanted a kingdom to know that she had arrived. The window came inward in one long crystalline collapse. Glass colored the floor of the throne room, red, gold, blue, white. The court, the assembled court that had been listening to my father rage at his secretary about losing contact with his soldiers, scattered in every direction. Guards drew weapons. Several of the older nobles ran for the back door. The secretary ducked behind a pillar. Luna's head came through the window frame. Her body was outside. Her head, larger than the average door, filled the opening. She made the soft growl she made when she was satisfied with a landing. I dropped from her back onto the windowsill. The scepter was in my right hand. Yggdrasil floated down beside me on her own ability, hair floating slightly in the indoor air, eyes the green that was not entirely meant for human company. Together, we stepped down from the windowsill onto the marble floor of the throne room I had been bound and dragged out of 3 years earlier. My father was still on the throne. He was older than I remembered. 3 years had been the kind of 3 years that ages a man. He was holding the arms of the throne with the white knuckles of a man who had been about to issue an order and had instead been overruled by physics. His mouth was open. His eyes were on Luna. Then his eyes were on me. "Father," I said. The word landed in the room more loudly than it had any right to. "Sorry about the window." The guards, to their credit, raised their weapons. They had been trained their whole lives to interpose themselves between the king and threats, and a son arriving on a divine dragon clearly qualified as a threat in the manual. Luna exhaled. She did not breathe fire. She just exhaled, slowly, in a long, warm cloud that filled the upper third of the throne room with the smell of a creature that could have removed the upper third of the throne room from the building if she had decided to. The guards lowered their weapons. I walked forward. I stopped at the foot of the dais, which was the position the kingdom's protocol prescribed for an audience. I did not kneel. I had not knelt to him in 3 years and was not going to start. I declared, I said, yesterday, the land of the Great Forest is, as of yesterday, a sovereign nation under my rule. I have come in person to give you the chance to recognize it formally, after which I will leave. I am not here to hurt anyone. I would like to make that very clear before we begin. My father found his voice. The voice was the voice I remembered, but it was older, hoarser, and it was operating on the wrong fuel. Anger that no longer had the institutional weight to back it up. Panic dressed as anger to disguise itself. He told me, in the long roundabout sentences a king uses when he is buying time, that a nation was not a thing that could be declared by a criminal. That nations required history, weight, the right to rule. That my brother was being held, was that correct? Was Bauhaus alive? What had I done to Bauhaus? And would be returned, of course. But the matter of the forest was not a matter I had any standing to. I waited for the sentence to finish. The sentence did not finish. It got tangled in itself, the way the sentences of a man losing his footing get tangled. He gave up halfway through and tried a different one. He told me that he would consider the matter. that envoys would be sent, that the conversation would naturally be conducted at length. I did not respond. I did not need to. Behind me, the throne room's main door opened. Two figures in white robes with gold embroidery walked in. They were the same envoys who had knelt outside my house 2 nights earlier. They had traveled from their order's capital, through the trade route, through the kingdom's own roads, with diplomatic credentials I had not asked to see, and they had not offered. They were, in this moment, the most powerful religious delegation on the continent. They processed up the central aisle in the careful procedural cadence of an institution that had been doing this for centuries. They stopped halfway. The senior of the two, the older male, with the gentle voice, addressed my father directly. He delivered the Spirit King's recognition. The document was a sealed scroll on parchment that had a particular kind of gold leaf border the kingdom recognized. It said, in the formal language of the Holy Celestia Theocracy, that the land of the Great Forest was henceforth recognized as the sovereign nation of Adrian Arclight, that the Church endorsed the legitimacy of his founding, and that any further military action against this sovereign would be considered an action against the Church itself. The document was handed to my father's secretary. The secretary handed it to my father. My father read it. He had built his political career on the assumption that the Church's quiet support could be relied upon. The Church had been a cornerstone of Arclight's legitimacy for 3 centuries. Reading the document, he was reading the cornerstone being moved. His hands began to shake. The shake was not anger. Anger I had seen before. This was the shake of a man whose footing had been removed and whose body was reporting the absence to him before his mind had finished processing the news. He slumped slightly in the throne. The secretary, watching, did not move. The court, what was left of it, did not move either. The church delegation stood quietly. Yggdrasil and I stood quietly. Luna's head, in the broken window, did not so much as blink. I had time to feel, for one strange second, sorry for him. He was, technically, my father. He had hurt me badly. He had also, when I was very small and could not remember it, picked me up off the floor of a nursery and held me. The two facts existed in the same person. I did not know what to do with that. I never had. The second passed. He looked up at me. His expression had changed. Zess, he said. Adrian, whatever you call yourself now. The voice was different. Dark sludge erupted from him. Not from his hands, not from his mouth. From inside him, in the deep pelvic rib area where strong negative emotion lives in a body. The same sludge I had seen on the elf squad and the kingdom soldiers and the great tree's corruption. The evil god's mark on a mortal mind, surfacing under sufficient pressure. He stood up. The motion was wrong. The angles his joints used were not entirely his own. The voice that came out of him was not entirely his own either. You? From the celestial realm, you? He came at me, sword off the wall, fast. Not the speed of a man in his 50s. The speed of something inside him, operating his body without the body's permission. Yggdrasil shouted. Luna roared. Both reactions were in the same breath. Neither was needed. I had been seeing the sludge build for the entire conversation. I had been waiting for it to break. The spirit eye had been telling me, quietly, since the first sentence I had spoken in the throne room, that there was something inside my father that was not my father, and that something had been there for a very long time. I raised the scepter. It happened the way it happened with Byron. The corruption inside Edmund had a shape, a parasite shape, anchored to his stress and pride, and centuries of accumulated kingdom resentments toward whatever was outside its borders. The scepter let me see it as a separate thing from the man. The man was an old, tired, frightened person. The parasite was the evil god's residue, the same evil god whose curse I had been cleaning out of the great forest for half a year. The two things were not the same. I cast purification on the parasite. The light came up out of Edmund in soft columns, 3 pillars, one from the head, one from the chest, one from the lower back. The dark sludge boiled out of him along with the light, hissed in the air, dissolved. He screamed, once, briefly, in the high voice of a creature that had been comfortable inside him for a long time and was being evicted. The scream cut off. The sword fell out of his hand. His knees folded. He went down on the dais like a man whose strings had been cut. The secretary caught him before his head hit the marble. The church envoys, who had been standing very still, dropped to their knees in unison. They began to pray, not loudly, the way priests pray when they have just witnessed something their order had been waiting centuries for. I lowered the scepter. I did not feel triumph. I had thought naively, when I had imagined this moment in the years since the throne room, that I might feel triumph. I felt instead the strange flat exhaustion of a man who had finally cleaned a stain that had been driving him mildly insane for a long time, and who was now standing in front of the patch of fabric, wondering how it had ever been allowed to get that bad. Yggdrasil came up beside me. She put her hand on my arm. She did not say anything for a moment. The church envoys finished their prayer. The senior of the two stood up. He bowed to me. "Savior," he said. I let it land. I did not protest the word. The word was theirs to give. It was, in their theology, the correct word for what they had just witnessed. I was not going to argue theology in a throne room with an unconscious king on the floor, and the entire continent's most powerful religious institution kneeling at my feet. The other envoy bowed too. The secretary, on his knees by the king, looked up at me with the expression of a man who had been holding himself professionally together for the entire confrontation and was about to stop. The remaining guards, all of them, set their weapons on the floor of the throne room without being told to, one by one. Soft, small clatters of metal on marble. The throne room went quiet. I stood there in the silence I had grown up in, holding the scepter that had chosen me, with the king who had thrown me away unconscious at my feet, and the church kneeling on his floor. I turned to Yggdrasil. "What now?" "Now," she said. "We let him sleep. When he wakes, he will sign the documents. Then we go home." "That's it? That's it?" Edmund woke up an hour later. He woke confused. He looked at the throne room, at the broken window, at Luna's head still in the frame, at the scepter in my hand, at the church delegation, at his own body on his own throne, and slowly, the memory of what had been inside him became distinguishable from the memory of what he had done while it had been inside him. I would not say he repented. I would say he understood, finally, that the cruelty he had been performing for 15 years had a depth to it he had not been able to see from inside. The church envoys helped him recover his composure. Robert, who had come through the trade circle the night before with the official documents I had requested, produced the parchments. The kingdom's formal apology for the unfounded treason charge against me 3 years earlier. The kingdom's recognition of my new nation. A binding non-aggression clause. Compensation terms for the village of Yggdrasil. Carnell had drafted them. Robert had refined them. Edmund signed. His hand was steady, in a way I had not expected. The secretary witnessed. The church envoys countersigned. The matter, by every continental legal standard, was done. I had been in the throne room for not quite 3 hours. I was thinking, distantly, about asking Robert how soon we could leave, when a side door slammed open and the castle maids burst through. There were many of them. There were the maids I remembered, and there were maids I did not. All of them in the same uniforms they had been wearing when I had last seen them. All of them with the same kind of half-formed apology on their faces. Lara was at the front. She was older than the day she had brought me Bauhaus's stained robe. She was crying. She ran across the throne room. She did not slow down. She came up to me, to the man with the scepter, the king, the savior, the foreign sovereign, and she grabbed my sleeve the way she had grabbed it that afternoon in the backyard 3 years ago when I had given her the cleaned robe and asked her to keep my secret. She did not say anything. She held on. Behind her, Agnes, the head maid, my Agnes, who had scolded the maids since I was 8, who had been in this castle since before my mother had been queen, walked through the door at her own pace. She stopped a respectable distance from me. She bowed, the formal deep bow a head maid gave to a foreign sovereign she had never met. Then she came forward and grabbed my other sleeve. "You stupid boy," she said, in the half-annoyance, half-love voice she had been using since I was small. "You stupid, stupid boy. We thought you were dead. We thought it for 3 years. The rest of the castle moved on by the 2nd month. We did not. We waited. Some of us stopped waiting because we had to. Most of us did not stop. I knew it the moment the dragon went over the courtyard. I knew the boy on the dragon was you before I had any reason to know. You stupid boy." She was talking, in the rambling way she talked when she was upset. The way I had heard her talk to the kitchen staff for years when something had gone wrong and she was processing it through her mouth. I did not interrupt. I let her say it. I did not answer. There was nothing to answer. The other maids piled up behind Agnes. They did not ask anything. They did not need anything. They just stood there, in the throne room I had been dragged out of 3 years earlier, holding pieces of my sleeve, and they cried quietly. One of them was making a small sound in her throat I recognized. Mira, the kitchen maid I had taught the apple trick to when I was 13. Another was Hilda, who had broken her wrist the year before my exile, and whose hand I had cleaned wraps for. They were all there. None of them asked me to be anything other than what I was. I stood there with my dry voice, the voice that had narrated my way through 15 years of being underestimated, and I did not have anything dry to say. The voice was not available to me at that particular moment. I felt Yggdrasil's hand on my back. "It is all right," she said. "Yes." It was the only word I could get out. I held still until Agnes had cried into my coat as much as Agnes was going to cry. Then I told her I had to go home, but that I would come back, that she could come visit, that the trade circle was open both ways. She nodded against my sleeve. I left through the broken window with the documents in Robert's portfolio and the scepter still warm in my hand. Luna had been waiting. Yggdrasil floated up beside me. The court, what remained of it, watched us go. I did not look back. I did not need to. The throne room had been the room I had carried more than I had known for 3 years. The rest of my life was not going to live there. The rest of my life was a village, a great tree, a wolf-eared mate with a stitched shoulder, an elf girl who brought breakfast, an exiled minister with a daughter, and a forest that was, finally, ready to be the rest of the way clean. The cleaner had cleaned the kingdom. The cleaner went home. The week at the palace had been long. I had spent it in the guest quarters, signing things, listening to Robert and Carnell coordinate document language with Edmund's secretary, eating meals with Anna and Sarah, and being intermittently swarmed by maids who had decided that my visit was a holiday they had been owed for 3 years. Edmund had stayed in his rooms most of the week. We had spoken twice. The conversations had been short. He had not apologized in words. He had signed every document put in front of him without arguing. That, I had decided, was as close to an apology as I was likely to get from him, and it was, in its own way, more useful than words would have been. When the documents were complete, Luna lifted us off from the palace courtyard at dawn. The kingdom watched us go. The ride home took the same 4 hours it had taken to get there. The village saw us coming. Robert had timed the homecoming announcement so the trade circle's central square would be full when we landed. Yggdrasil saw us first. She was on the lowest bough of the great tree in the green dress, and she lit up in a way I had not seen since the day the dwarves had named the village after her. Sonia, beside her, was holding a bandage where her shoulder had been 3 days earlier and waving with the other arm. Flora was at the edge of the crowd, hands folded, watching me with an expression I did not entirely have the energy to read. Luna landed. I dropped down. The village erupted. The dwarves cheered. The elves cheered. The freed kingdom soldiers, many of whom had elected to stay rather than walk home, cheered. Sonia tackled me, gently, on her good shoulder. The dwarves hoisted Robert onto their shoulders, which Robert handled with the dignity of a man who had been preparing for several days for this exact moment to be undignified. The trade post handed me, before I had finished returning hugs, the official documents in their leather portfolio. That night, Robert and Dorado and Carnell and the elven elders convened in my house. Robert had a proposal. He laid it out with a calmness I had come to recognize as his most convincing register. The kingdom's recognition was real, but the empire and the duchy had not signed. They needed to be invited. The way to invite them was a founding festival, large, formal, public, that would force their hand to either attend or look like they had refused. The festival could be coordinated through the trade route. The dwarves would build. The elves would weave banners. Peter would cook for everyone on the continent who showed up. Sonia, in the doorway, said only the word festival and clapped. The matter was effectively decided. I agreed. I started laughing somewhere in the middle of agreeing because the cleaner was apparently throwing a continental founding festival now, and the cleaner had not, 3 months earlier, been entirely sure he was going to figure out the laundry rotation for the dwarves. I sat with that. I let it land. I had to escape Robert's office for a while. Robert understood. He always understood. He let me out the back through the kitchen with the polite nod of a finance minister who knew that his sovereign needed 40 minutes of unscheduled time and would be returning to sign more documents in the afternoon. I went to the trade post because that was where the dirty work was happening. The freed kingdom soldiers, about 80 of them had stayed, asking to work in exchange for the right to remain, were carrying lumber. Their armor had been put away. They were wearing village clothes now. They were building. I had asked Yggdrasil why they had stayed. She had told me, with her usual brevity, that being purified after years of carrying corruption left a person grateful in a way that was not always rational. I approached one of them. He recognized me, because they all did now. I asked casually if I could clean the tools they were using. The lumber saws had been getting blunted by sap and grime. He looked at me, blinked, and held out the saw with both hands. I cast cleaning 6 in a row. The saws went pristine. The men gathered around. I cleaned their cloaks, their boots, the wagon they had been loading. I had not done this much continuous cleaning in 2 months. The familiar small joy I felt every time the skill worked rolled through me in the steady rhythm of a man returning to his trade. In the middle of the 8th cast, something happened. The light coming out of me was not the light of cleaning. It was bigger. It was warmer. It was, and the spirit eye was confirming this, in real time, faster than I could process it. coming from a skill I had not previously had. The skill activated itself. It activated outward in a soft, slow ripple that I could feel reaching the trade post first, then the village square, then the great tree, then Yggdrasil's domain, then beyond. It kept going. I sat down hard on a stack of lumber. The wave kept extending. It moved along the trade route's spiritual links. Every connection the trade route skill had registered, every place the village had touched. I could feel it touching the Holy Celestia Theocracy's first temple. I could feel it touching the duchy in the north. I could feel it brushing the eastern road and following the soldiers I had freed home and continuing east, and reaching, briefly, the throne room and the maid's quarters, and Agnes herself, somewhere in the kitchens of the palace, who had paused in whatever she was doing and looked up at the ceiling. The skill name arrived in my status field a second after the activation finished. Blessing of the Cleansing King. That was the last thing I thought before the ground tilted. I woke up in my bed. It was the next day, late morning. Yggdrasil was sitting cross-legged in the air at the foot of the bed, with the patient expression of a person who had been there for a while. Flora was asleep in the chair next to the bed, with her hands in her lap and her hair untied, and the kind of tired in her face that comes from having used healing magic for a continuous 12 hours. She did not leave, was the phrase that surfaced in my head before I had finished waking up. Yggdrasil, watching me arrive at it, said the phrase out loud as if she had read my mind, which, given the spiritual contract, was possible. She did not leave. All night, all night. The healing took longer than it would have, because you are not what you were 2 months ago. Your stats are higher. The healing struggled to keep up. She did not stop. I looked at Flora. She had been bringing me breakfast for months. She had been beside me at the elf village. She had nearly said something to me at a stream's edge. She had sat in this chair the entire night without sleeping because the math of my body had outgrown her healing skill, and she had not been willing to leave until the math caught up. I did not have a clean reaction to it. I had several reactions at once. None of them were the dry kind. Yggdrasil, very softly, said, "She likes you." I know. Do you? I know now. We did not say anything else about it. Flora did not need me to say anything about it. The right thing, the kind thing, the only thing, was to not ask her to perform the conversation when she had used herself up trying to keep me alive. I checked my status, because checking my status was what I did. The level field read 67. Mental power had moved from rank A to rank SS. There was a new permanent skill, Purification King's Protection. The job line, which had read Cleaning Master with question mark since the Hot Spring chapter, now read Purification King, also with question marks. The gods, Yggdrasil told me when I asked, were keeping the question marks because they had decided on theological grounds that I might exceed even the new title eventually. The marks were a courtesy. I asked Yggdrasil what was next. She told me what I had already decided in my sleep. We finished the forest. Yes, I sat up. Flora made a small sleeping sound. I did not wake her. The Great Forest, from the boundary, was still about half cursed. The eastern third of it, the northwestern lobe, a long, narrow corruption spine that ran south. I had been picking at it for half a year in cautious, careful sections, and I had cleared maybe a third of the original area. The rest of it was still the place that had killed people for centuries. The divine right scepter, in my hand that midday, gave me the territorial perception it had given me when I had purified the army from the air. I could feel the entire Great Forest beneath my spirit eye now, from the boundary out to the foothills of the eastern mountains. I could see the curse veins. I could see the clean veins. I could see the boundary between them, like the edge of a stain on a fabric. Yggdrasil stood beside me. She had braided her hair for the occasion. The trick, I said, is the boundary. If I purify the boundary first, the line between clean and corrupted, and you concentrate Spirit's blessing along that line as I push it outward, the curse won't be able to flood back into the cleaned section. The clean expands as a continuous surface. Yes. The whole forest in one sustained push. Yes. Is that going to kill me? You will need to sleep for a week. But no. Then let's clean a forest. I raised the scepter. The purification that came out of it was different from anything I had cast before. The scepter focused it into a long, steady, sustained working. Not an eruption, but a careful, continuous pressure on the boundary line, pushing east as Yggdrasil's barrier kept the clean side clean. The corruption did not resist as much as I had expected. It had been pushed back enough times by the small attempts that the wide push felt almost easy. The boundary moved slowly, the way a horizon moves on a long, flat road. It took 2 hours. The forest, when I lowered the scepter, was clean. All of it. The eastern mountains' foothills marked the new edge. The Great Forest, the Cursed Forest, the place that had been the kingdom's death sentence for as long as anyone could remember, was now a forest. Just a forest. With monsters that were ordinary forest monsters. With weather that was ordinary forest weather. With trees that were doing what trees were supposed to do. The mission Yggdrasil had asked me to take on, in the clearing under the great tree, 6 months earlier, when she had told me her name and asked me to stay, was complete. I was tired. I sat down on the moss. The scepter, beside me, was warm. Yggdrasil sat next to me. We looked at the forest. She did not say anything for a long time. I did not push her. The forest below us was the forest she had been born to purify and had failed to purify alone for centuries. She had earned the silence. When she did speak, her voice was different. It was not the formal register she used for state matters. It was not the playful one she used in the village. It was the quiet one she had used the day I had woken up at the great tree and she had given me a lap pillow, and we had not yet been a contract or a household, just two people meeting after a long wait. "Adrian," she said, "I do not have the words I would like to have. You don't need them. I would still like to have them. I am not used to not having them." I waited. She gathered something. She floated up to a low branch above us and reached in among the leaves. When she came back down, she had something in her hand. It was small. It was woven. It was a circle of fresh, living green branches, plaited together with the kind of patience only a tree spirit possessed, with 2 leaves still attached on opposite sides. She placed it on my head. She did not announce it. She did not declare anything. She did not say the word king or the word ruler or anything formal at all. She just placed the crown on my head with both hands, the way one places a familiar hat on a friend. And she stepped back. The leaves moved very slightly with the breeze. The branches were not heavy. They sat the way something well-fitted sits. They were also clearly alive, which was, for someone whose entire identity had been built around restoring things, the right material. "There," she said. "It suits you." "It does not suit me." "It suits you. Do not argue." I did not argue. I touched the crown briefly. The branches were warm, Yggdrasil's warmth, the warmth of a thing she had grown specifically. I left it on. I would, I realized, leave it on permanently. The crown was not technically the kind of crown the rest of the continent would recognize as a crown. It would, as it dried over the next weeks, become a wreath of leaves rather than a circlet of metal. I would still leave it on. The other crown, the metal one, could be made by Dorado later if Robert insisted. The branches were the one that mattered. We sat there a while longer. Below us, the wind moved through the cleaned forest. Birds called from places where birds had not been able to live for centuries. Somewhere, very far east, the boundary between Yggdrasil's domain and the kingdoms had become only an idea on a map. The forest itself no longer needed defending. "Adrian," she said. "Yes, what now?" "Now I go home and I tell Robert the founding festival can include a tour of the new forest. Now I go home and I sleep for a week. Now I go home and I tell Sonia I am proud of her, which I should have told her 3 days ago. And the cleaning? There are 100 new places that have not been cleaned yet. I have a lot of work to do." She laughed once. I had not heard her laugh that way before. I stood up. I helped her float a little, which was probably backwards as gestures went, but felt right at the time. We turned toward the village. The cleaner went home with a crown on his head. He was finally going to do the laundry. A week passed, then another, then most of a third. I had spent the first 2 days sleeping. I had spent the next 4 attending brief meetings, diplomatic letters, trade reports, immigration intake. I had spent the next 4 trying to do small bits of laundry, only to find every basket I approached already empty. I had spent the rest of it walking around the village with the increasing low-grade panic of a man whose definition of himself had quietly stopped being applicable to his daily life. Yggdrasil had told me, on the morning of the 5th day, that I was going through the kind of identity adjustment kings often went through. She had told me, on the morning of the 8th day, that I was being ridiculous. By the morning of the 15th day, she had stopped being delicate about it. The village was thriving. The forest was clean. The kingdom had recognized me. The church had recognized me. The empire and duchy invitations had been sent. Several thousand new immigrants had arrived through the trade circle. The dwarves were building. The elves were weaving. Peter was running a small culinary empire. The cleaner, the man who had spent 15 years being told he was nothing, was, by every measurable standard, doing extremely well. The problem was not the rest. The problem was that during the rest, the village had quietly arranged itself to make the rest permanent. I came down to breakfast on the 7th day to find my dining room full. 3 maids, Agnes from the palace, and two of the women who had come with her through the trade circle were arguing about whose turn it was to serve me. Lara was trying to feed me a piece of fruit. Agnes was scolding Lara with the warmth of a headmaid who had been scolding her for 15 years. Sonia, in the doorway, was growling at all of them and being deliberately ignored. The food on the table was a feast. The immigrant cooks had decided that today was a competition day. There were 6 varieties of egg. There were 3 kinds of bread. There was a pastry I did not recognize that someone had decorated with a pattern of small carved fruit. There was a pot of soup that Peter had been working on since dawn. There was, in pride of place, a basket of laundered napkins that someone had clearly cleaned for me to display the cleanliness of, because I had been seen looking forlornly at the empty laundry baskets that morning. I sat down. I ate from the plate already in front of me, on my own, with my own hands. Agnes looked at me with the half-amused, half-scolding expression she had been giving me since I was 8. Lara looked betrayed. Sonia approved. The cooks, watching from the kitchen doorway, were crestfallen that I had not eaten more. I tried to compliment them. The compliment came out badly. I think I said the soup was clean, which was not, in soup criticism terminology, the standard compliment. Peter forgave me with a smile. The cooks did not entirely forgive me. Sonia, who had no concept of social embarrassment, ate 3 of my pastries. I went outside to find Idrasil. She was on her usual branch, doing what she did most mornings, which was nothing. I told her quietly that I had a problem. She lifted an eyebrow. I told her the problem was that I had not used the cleaning skill in a week. She watched me for a moment. Then she said, in the voice she used when she was about to say something I was not going to enjoy. In other words, because there are more people and you have nothing to do and everyone spoils you, you are afraid of becoming a lazy person. That is exactly the problem. Adrian, your emotions are scary. I know. She told me, with the fond exasperation only a great spirit could deliver, that I was a king. Kings did not need to do laundry. Kings had laundry done for them. The point of being a king was to give other people their roles by accepting your own. I told her I understood the theory. I told her the theory had not addressed the practical problem of my hands being idle and my chest being uncomfortable, and the entire week feeling like an extended punishment for the crime of having succeeded. She did not laugh, but I knew she wanted to. She informed me, with the same warmth, that there were cleaning options I had not considered, including, for example, the matter of the cursed remnants in the regions outside the formal protected zone, where the purification had not fully reached because I had specifically directed the boundary. There were always more places that could use the skill. The trick was that I had to go and find them, rather than waiting for them to arrive at the village. That landed. I had not thought about it that way. The work was not over. It was just no longer arriving on its own. Hawk, Luna, in her smaller form, landed on my head with a garu, and the kind of urgency she reserved for actual messages. Robert, she communicated through the bond, was looking for me. I sighed. I went to find Robert. Robert was at his office, which was the trade post's back room, because he had also moved out of the kitchen of my house and into a building that had been built for him. The building had a desk. The desk was buried. He looked up when I came in and let out the breath of a man who had been preparing for the conversation by chasing me around for an hour. He had a list. The list was, the village was overflowing. Immigration through the trade route had tripled in the last 2 weeks. The village's housing capacity was already saturated. The dwarves were building, but the building was slower than the arriving. The new founding festival would require a royal castle for receiving the foreign dignitaries. Robert refused to host the Egris Emperor in my current modest house, as the modest house would, in his words, set a tone he was not willing to set. The empire and duchy invitations needed to go out next week, and the festival could not be properly invited until the country had an official name. I asked him how he had been managing. He told me he had been managing, but he was beginning to need help on 3 of the items. I thought about it. The realization arrived the way good realizations do, quickly, with the sense of a problem solving itself. What if I helped scout new settlement sites? He looked at me. In person. The Great Forest is fully purified now. There are areas where new towns could be founded, but someone has to identify them. I have the scepter, which gives me a territorial overview. I have Luna. I have Sonia, who would absolutely come if I asked. We could find sites for 3 or 4 new settlements in a week. The immigrants flowing in could be diverted there. The pressure on the village would drop. And I did not finish the and. The and was that I would be using my purification skill again on whatever cursed remnants we found in the new sites, on the immigrants coming in, on the fields. I would have my hands moving again. I would not be useless. The "and" was selfish, and Robert was sharp enough to see it without my saying so. He took a long breath. He looked at me with the expression of a man who had been preparing several speeches and was now scrapping all of them. "Lord Adrian," he said, "if you are personally willing to oversee land selection for the common people who have come here for refuge, that is more than I would have asked. That is, frankly, more than the kingdom you came from would have asked of any of its rulers in living memory. I will arrange the trip immediately." He turned, called for a messenger, and started writing letters. Yggdrasil, in the doorway, looked at me with the small smile of a person who had watched a person solve their own problem in real time. "Subtle," she said. "He bought it. He did not buy it. He saw what you were doing and decided to pay for it anyway." I thought about that. She was probably right. Robert was, after all, Robert. That afternoon, we settled the country's name. The council assembled in the central square. Robert had drawn maps. Dorado had brought the Dwarven elders. Carnell was there with the paperwork drafts. Flora and Peter were there because the household had voted them in by acclamation. Sonia was there because Sonia was always wherever I was now. I told them the rules. The name should describe what the country is. Not me, not the dwarves specifically, not the elves specifically, not the great tree technically, because the village is already named for that. The country needs a name that means something the whole continent can recognize from the word. The dwarves immediately suggested Adrian's realm. I said no. The elves suggested the land of the spirit. Yggdrasil, beside me, made a small noise that meant she was pretending to be offended and was not actually offended. Sonia suggested, with bright certainty, Adriaionia, after the two of us. I told her, with great patience, that this was the same suggestion she had made for the village name, and the answer remained no. Peter said, beaming, that we should call it the Cozy Relax Country. I appreciated the suggestion. I declined. Flora suggested, very quietly, the Purified Realm. The table went still. It was the right name. It described the country. It described what the country had become. It described what the country was for. The whole continent would understand it from the word. And, though Flora had not said this, and would never say this, because she was not a person who said this kind of thing out loud, it described, in 3 words, the entire arc of what I had spent the last 6 months doing. I looked at her. She looked back at me. Then, she looked at her hands, the way she did when she was trying not to be looked at. "The Purified Realm," I said. Robert wrote it down. Carnell ran a quick check against all known foreign language meanings and confirmed the name had no offensive translations in any major language. The dwarves cheered. The elves bowed. Sonia, who had not entirely understood the moment, but understood that something good had happened, hugged me from the side. Yggdrasil watched the whole thing with the soft expression of a person who had, in her own quiet way, named the country a year before any of the rest of us had thought to. The great tree behind us made a small, low sound that was not exactly an audible sound, but which everyone present interpreted as approval. The divine right scepter, leaning against the side of my chair, brightened slightly as the name was spoken aloud. The country, by some divine record-keeping I did not entirely understand, had just become a real country. "The Purified Realm," she repeated. "It's a good name," I said. "Yes, it is a good name. It is also, I suspect, the name the gods have been calling this place since the moment you cleaned the great tree." "Don't." "What?" "Don't make me responsible for the gods' opinions." "I am not making you responsible. I am merely informing you." I let that go. There was no winning that conversation with her ever. She knew what she knew. The gods clearly knew what they knew. The country, henceforth, would be the Purified Realm, and would presumably continue to be the Purified Realm long after I had stopped being its first king. That night, the founding festival's invitations went out via Roland's network. The trip to find new settlement sites was scheduled for the morning. Sonia had already packed. Yggdrasil was coming. Robert was coming, against his own preference, because someone had to write down what we found. Luna was, technically, packed. I climbed into bed under my new wreath of dried leaves with a head full of plans. The cleaner had a country, a wife by acclamation, a great spirit, a divine dragon, a finance minister, an elf household, and a flight at dawn to find new settlements. I had no idea what was waiting for us in the western grasslands. None of us did. The cleaner was, if I am being honest, looking forward to finding out. Luna lifted us off at dawn, and we were over the great forest by mid-morning. The forest, from above, was the forest I had not been able to imagine when I had first landed in it. The corruption was gone. The canopy was a continuous green that stretched to the horizon in every direction. Rivers I had never seen before glittered in long looping curves through the green. Lakes I had never known about caught the light. The eastern mountains rose in the distance like a wall painted by a careful hand. The cursed forest was a forest, and the forest was clean, and the forest was very large. Robert, behind me, was making sounds. He had not been on Luna before. He had volunteered for the trip with the bravery of a man who had been raised in a coastal city and had never been more than a tower's height off the ground. The bravery had carried him to liftoff. Liftoff had not been kind to it. He was now clinging to the strap I had insisted Robert use, with both hands, with his eyes occasionally open and occasionally not. "Robert," I said. "Yes, Lord Adrian. Do you want to land for a moment?" "No, Lord Adrian." "Are you sure?" "Yes, Lord Adrian." I let him have his dignity. Sonia, on Luna's neck ridge in front of me, was lying across Luna's scales like a person on a beach, with her chin in her hand and her tail flicking in the wind. She had ridden Luna a dozen times. She enjoyed it the way a child enjoys a roller coaster, with full body commitment and zero concern about the mechanics. Yggdrasil floated beside me on her own ability. She had been quiet for a while. I held the scepter forward. The territorial perception unfurled. I could feel the entire forest beneath us, the clean lines, the new spirit veins forming where the curse had retreated, the small, healthy monsters that had moved into the cleansed sections, the rivers, the lakes. I marked 4 candidate sites for new settlements as we passed them: a clearing near a river bend in the southwest, a flat meadow along the northern road, a hill overlooking the eastern lake, and a soft valley running between the foothills. Robert, with his eyes briefly open, took notes. The forest was not quite empty of human presence anymore. I could feel, through the scepter, a few scattered hunters' camps, a small party of refugees from the kingdom moving slowly westward, and at one place I could not entirely identify, a faint pressure that did not feel like any of the others. Something far west of us, beyond the forest, in the grasslands. I noted it. I did not yet know what it was. Yggdrasil broke the silence at the western edge. "I cannot feel any others," she said. Her voice was the formal one, the one she used when she was saying a true thing and did not want to be persuaded out of it. "Others? Other great spirits. The forest, now that it is clean, has the network restored. I should be able to feel any spirit my level within a few hundred miles. I cannot feel any." "How many were there, originally?" "More than one. Less than 10. Not all of them in the great forest itself. The curse spread along ley lines across the continent, but enough to be a small society. We were created as a network, the way a series of streams forms a river. I have not felt any of them since I was old enough to listen. I had assumed they were hiding. With the forest clean, there is nothing left to hide from." "They didn't hide." "No," she said. "They did not hide." She looked at the horizon. Her hair was floating slightly in the wind off Luna's wings. I had known Yggdrasil for almost a year. I had never seen her grieve before. Grief on her did not look like grief on a person. It looked like something old going quieter than usual. "I have you all now," she said, after a long moment, with what I was learning to recognize as her "you do not need to comfort me" voice. "It does not matter. I am not alone. It matters. It matters less. There is a difference." I did not push it. The forest below us was the answer to the centuries her sisters had not survived. We had cleaned what could be cleaned. The grief was something she would carry. I let her carry it. Sonia turned her head. The wind off the grasslands had brought her something. Her ears flattened. Her tail went rigid in a way that meant attention. Then she said the word that meant family in Beastkin, with sudden delighted recognition, and before any of us could react, she launched herself off Luna's back into the open air. "Sonia!" She fell. She fell at speed. She landed somewhere in the tall grass 300 meters below us in a single slam that I felt in Luna's scales. Luna immediately banked. "Robert," I said, "don't worry about me. Lord Adrian, I will figure it out." We banked. We landed in the meadow next to a group that had not been there a minute earlier. There were 6 of them, beastmen of 3 different tribes: wolf, tiger, and what I was learning to recognize as a kind of lizard shaman variant, with cooler eyes and a different posture. They had been moving through the meadow for some time by the look of their gear. They had heard Sonia's drop, and they were pointing crossbows and clubs at the place where Luna had decided to land us. They lowered the weapons when they saw Sonia. The reaction was immediate and complicated. Several of them said her name. Several of them said other words. The biggest of them, a wolf-eared beastman my height, with a beard streaked gray and a build that made Luna look almost reasonable in comparison, took 2 steps forward and stopped, looking at Sonia, and then at me, and then at Sonia again, with the slowly assembling expression of a man putting together pieces that he did not enjoy putting together. He was, I would learn in the next 30 seconds, Sonia's father, Griffin, the pack's chief. He charged at me before any of the introductions had been made. I had time to register the velocity of his approach. Then Sonia was between us, midair, and her boot was on his chest, and the 2 of them went sideways through the meadow in a tangle of tail and beard. They came up rolling. Griffin stood up first, said something to Sonia about masters, something about disrespect, something about whoever I was, and whatever I had done to his daughter. Sonia threw him again. He came back. She threw him again, this time into a tree at the edge of the meadow, where he stayed. The other beastmen had not moved. They were watching the way one watches a domestic situation one does not have authority to intervene in. Sonia, I said. Yes, master. Who is that? Father, I see. Robert, behind me, made the small sound of a man whose first encounter with beastkin family dynamics had not prepared him for what he had just seen. Sonia turned to her father, who was extracting himself from the tree, and explained, briefly, that I was not technically her master, and that the situation was complicated, and that he should listen for a moment before attacking again. Griffin, possibly because the tree had taken something out of him, listened. Griffin sat. The other beastman sat. Idrasil hovered slightly off the grass, because she did not, as a rule, sit on grass. He told us, in the awkward voice of a man who was working through a story he was not used to telling out loud, that the pack was searching for Sonia because they needed her. The pack had been moving westward for 3 weeks. Their guardian deity, a being his people had served for generations, sealed in a spirit stone at their seasonal shrine, had gone berserk. The spirit stone was cracking. The deity was lashing out from inside it, and the lashings were destroying their camps. They could not contain it. Their shaman had said only the pack chief, with the strongest spirit in the tribe, could approach the stone and try to reseat the seal. Their pack chief was Sonia. The pack had not realized she was their chief at the time she had left. She had been the strongest in her age cohort, and the title had passed to her on her grandmother's death several months earlier, while she had been at Yggdrasil village. The pack had searched for her for the entire 3 weeks since the deity began going wrong. Sonia had not known any of this. She did not, when Griffin told her, react with the kind of alarm I had expected. She reacted with the small, concentrated focus of a person who had a job. She told her father that she would come. Then she looked at me. I looked at Yggdrasil. Yggdrasil looked at me. Yggdrasil's expression was the one she used when she had drawn conclusions before I had finished saying them. It is the same pattern, she said. Yes, you are going to come with her. I am. Robert beside me started to protest, then stopped, then sighed. I asked Griffin what the deity looked like, normally. He told me. A wolf, a white wolf, a pack mother shape in the old tribe stories. Currently, he said, it looked black. The white was not visible anymore. It had not been visible for several weeks. I had heard the description before. We're going, I said. All of us. Robert can wait at the edge of the camp if he prefers. Sonia is going to lead. Luna will fly us in. I looked at Griffin. I am Adrian. I am the king of the new nation in the great forest. I have purified 2 divine beings from this exact pattern of corruption. I am going to do it again. Your daughter has been excellent in my service for half a year, and your tree impact incident is forgiven. Griffin, who is still slightly tree bruised, looked at me for a long second. You are not Sonia's master. I am not. Why not? She has not asked me to be in a way I can answer in the affirmative without more conversation. He thought about that. He sighed. He stood up. The other beastman stood up. Show us the dragon. Luna, who had been small and on my shoulder during the conversation, hopped down to the grass, walked 5 paces away, and grew. She grew steadily, the way she did when she wanted to give people a chance to register the change. By the time she was full size, the beastmen were prostrate, even Griffin. The lizardman shaman said a single word in a language I did not recognize, with the cadence of a prayer. We took off. The camp was at the foot of a mountain. It had been hit. Several tents were down. A long furrow had been cut through the dust where something the size of a small house, had landed and slid for 50 meters before stopping. The remaining beastmen, perhaps 30 of them, were sheltering between the standing tents. They came out when they heard Luna's wings. They came out armed. Griffin called them off in the harsh, sharp voice of a chief taking command back. They lowered their weapons. Sonia was greeted with the kind of greeting one gives a chief who has returned at the worst possible moment. Several of them bowed. Several of them simply looked at her with something that was not entirely relief. She told them, briefly, that she was here. She told them I was here. She told them, in a sentence I had not coached, and she had clearly thought about herself, that the wolf would be cleaned by the king and would come back to them as the white she had once been. I had not promised that. I would, watching Sonia say it, have to make the promise true. The shrine was up the slope, a narrow crack in the mountain. Griffin led. Yggdrasil floated just above me. Sonia walked at my side. Robert chose to wait at the camp with the other beastmen, with the careful dignity of a finance minister who had decided that this part of the trip was, with all respect, beyond his remit. The crack opened into a chamber. The chamber was wider than the crack suggested. The ceiling was high. In the center of the chamber, on a stone altar, sat a green-colored emerald spirit stone the size of a wagon wheel. glowing faintly from within. Cracks ran across its surface. Black mist was leaking from the cracks in slow, constant exhalations. A lizardman shaman, cross-legged on a mat at the far side of the altar, looked up when we entered. His face was the careful face of a man who had been the only thing standing between his pack and a god gone wrong for too many days, with no resources. He told us, with respect, that he had done what he could, that the seal would not hold past tonight, that if we were going to act, now was the time. Yggdrasil, beside me, said quietly that she felt the wrongness inside the stone. She felt it as a separate thing from the deity itself, the same way she had felt it inside Edmund. The deity was being ridden, just as the king had been ridden, just as Luna had been ridden the day I had landed in the cursed forest. I raised the scepter. I cast purification at the stone. The black mist dispersed, briefly. Then it came back, twice as thick, from the cracks. The stone groaned. The cracks widened. Adrian, Yggdrasil said. The stone shattered. The cave ceiling went next. The stone shattered first, 1,000 emerald shards. Then a long black sound, not a roar, not yet, something below roaring, pushed upward from the broken altar and took the cave ceiling with it. Stone exploded outward into the evening sky. The chamber became, in 2 seconds, an open-air shrine under the dusklight. The thing that emerged was the size of a barn, a wolf the size of a barn, with fur made of moving black wind, with eyes the color of a void that had not yet decided what color to be, with a presence that pressed down on the chamber, like the pressure that had pressed down the day Luna had first descended on me at the edge of the cursed forest. The same kind of pressure, the same kind of being, the same kind of corruption riding it. The wolf landed half outside the shrine. Its front paws were on broken stone. Its head was higher than the cliffs around the shrine. It looked down at us. The wind that moved through its fur was not wind from the world outside. It was wind that came from inside the wolf, from somewhere the wolf was attached to, from somewhere the curse had been waiting in this body for a long time. Sonia, beside me, did not move. Griffin did not move either. He had the look of a man who had been raised on stories of his pack's guardian deity, and who was now seeing the deity as the deity had not been seen in his lifetime. He had heard her voice in his cradle. He had brought offerings to her stone every season. He had, in the way men of his pack were raised, prayed to her every morning of his adult life. He was looking at her now and finding her unrecognizable. The wolf opened its mouth. A sound that was a voice, not a wolf's voice, not a person's voice, but a voice with words wrapped inside it like cloth around a blade, said distantly that I had appeared at last. I had heard the line before, in different contexts. The evil god's residue, the same residue I had been cleaning out of bodies and forests and skills for half a year, knew who I was now. The forest had been one thing, the kingdom had been another. This was the same enemy, in a new shape, in a new body, with the same trick. The pattern was, by now, familiar. The cleaner recognized the stain. Luna, behind me, was already growing. She had moved from my shoulder to the open ground in 3 economical movements, and was, by the time I felt her at my back, full size. The 2 divine beings on the field, the corrupted wolf and the white dragon, looked at each other for a moment with the recognition of a kind seeing its kind. Yggdrasil, beside me, said the word that meant attention in the spirit tongue. Her hands were up. She was already shaping her spirit's blessing into a perimeter around us. The shrine, the camp at the foot of the mountain, the 30 beastmen waiting below, all of them needed to be inside the perimeter when this fight began. Sonia, in front of me, said only, and I would never forget the steadiness of it, the absolute simplicity of her voice. Master, make her white again. I did not answer. The answer was the work. The divine right scepter in my hand was already warm. The spirit eye showed me the corruption inside the wolf with the same clarity it had shown me the corruption inside my father. A parasite shape, a separate thing, attached to the deity's spirit, but not the deity. The deity beneath it was something I could feel, ancient, kind, currently in pain, currently very far down inside her own body, listening for someone to remember her. I raised the scepter. The cleaner had a wolf to clean.